Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Also, you can request any novel so I can turn into audiobooks. Check out our Patreon for more details.
21, Chapter 21, First Guests. The storm blew itself out in the early hours before dawn, leaving Potter Castle cocooned in silence. Snow lay in deep drifts along the outer wall and piled high against the windows. Inside, the great hall glowed golden from the banked embers. The wildlings had slept deeply, sprawled across rugs and benches with the peaceful exhaustion of people who had not known safety in many seasons. Harry had woken once in the night to check the fire. He moved quietly among them, pulling a blanket over the youngest, a boy no more than 6, and tucking a fur cloak over a woman who'd fallen asleep sitting up. When he finally slipped into his own room, the air felt warm and still. He lay in bed thinking of Lyanna asleep in the next chamber, of Winter curled somewhere above them in his hidden cave, and of what it meant to build something lasting in a world that devoured everything. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Morning came soft and gray. The fire had been coaxed back to life by the time Harry stirred and pulled on a wool tunic. He heard the rustle of movement and quiet voices in the hall. When he stepped out of his room, several of the wildlings were already awake. The bearded man who seemed to lead them was squatting near the hearth, rubbing his hands together over the flames. 2 women were cutting up the last piece of meat to share among the children. One by one, the others began to sit up, blinking as they remembered where they were. Harry offered them a calm nod. "Good morning." They watched him warily, as though expecting he'd demand something now that the storm had passed. A woman with a long scar across her cheek spoke first. "You have our thanks," she said gruffly. "If not for this place." She trailed off, gesturing helplessly toward the white wilderness beyond the window. "You're welcome," Harry said simply. "No debt owed." Lyanna emerged from her room a few moments later, her hair in a loose braid over her shoulder. She smiled at the sight of the children gathered near the hearth. "Did everyone sleep well?" she asked gently. One of the boys nodded shyly. The bearded man, he hadn't yet offered his name, rose to his feet, towering over Harry by a hand's breadth. "I am Bryn of the Flint Foot," he said. His voice was a gravelly rumble. "These are my kin." "Harry Potter," Harry replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "And this is Lyanna." Bryn's brows lifted faintly at the name, but he only inclined his head. "It's been long since any south of the wall showed kindness." Lyanna folded her hands over her belly. "You're running from someone," she guessed. Bryn's jaw tightened. A cannibal tribe called the Shattered Teeth." She glanced at Harry. "I've heard tales, men who eat the flesh of their own kind. They came down on us when the first snows fell," Bryn went on, voice low. "We lost our tents, most of our stores. Those who stayed to fight." He swallowed. "Not many lived to run." Harry's mind began turning, swift and precise. "So you need a place to rebuild," he said. Bryn eyed him warily. Lyanna stepped closer. "There's room on this land," she said softly. "And Harry, he built this place himself. He can help you." Several wildlings shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. "Why would you help us?" demanded the scarred woman. "What do you gain?" Harry met her gaze without flinching. "I don't need anything from you. But if you stay here, you can work, trade, and live without fear of the crows or other tribes hunting you down, and without needing to steal to survive." He hesitated, then added carefully, "In time, you can build something better for your children." Bryn looked around the hall, at the thick walls, the steady fire, the simple comforts his people hadn't known in their life. "What would you have of us?" he asked finally. "Nothing you wouldn't give freely," Harry said. "Help me with the land, hunt, share your knowledge. I'll teach you other skills, ways to make life easier. And I swear by earth and sky, no one here will ever be forced to bend the knee." Lyanna rested her hand on Harry's arm, her touch warm. "We built this place with the goal of people living peacefully," she murmured. He nodded. "A community." Bryn drew a long breath. His shoulders slumped a little, the weariness in him visible now that he knew there would be no demands of tribute or oaths. "We will stay," he said gruffly. "For now. When the weather eases, we'll help you hunt and see how this arrangement suits." "That's all I ask," Harry said. While Lyanna gathered a meal, thick broth with smoked fish and onions, Harry showed Bryn and 2 others around the small settlement. "This is the smokehouse," he said, gesturing to the stout round building of stone. You can preserve meat here if you have more than you can eat. He led them past the sheep pens. The sight of the animals drew startled sounds from the wildlings. You have livestock, Bran said, wonder threading through his voice. Animals thrive here, Harry said. If you help tend them, there'll be milk, wool, and meat enough for everyone. At last, he guided them to the watchtower. From the top platform, they could see the frozen Antler River winding past the pines, the white plains stretching beyond to the foothills. Bran was silent for a long time as he looked out over the land. You could hold this place against 1,000 men, he said quietly. Harry turned his face into the wind. Perhaps, but I'd rather not have to. When they returned to the hall, Lyanna had laid out bread and salt on the table, the old rite renewed. The Flintfoot clan looked from her face to Harry's and slowly approached the offering. One by one, they broke bread, dipped it in salt, and ate in solemn silence. Lyanna smiled at them. You're our guests, she said. But if you wish it, you may be our neighbors. Harry felt something shift in the room then, a softening of suspicion, the first fragile roots of trust. As the wind sighed along the eaves, he thought of the first time he'd stumbled into this frozen land with nothing but desperation and a stolen dragon. Maybe, he thought, this really is the start of something. And though the world beyond Potter Castle was still harsh and uncertain, within those walls, a new kind of home was taking shape. In the weeks that followed the storm, the Flintfoot wildlings settled uneasily into life around Potter Castle. They were cautious at first, eyes wary, hands never straying far from the hafts of their knives. But time and steady kindness were powerful things. Each dawn, as the sky turned from indigo to pale gray, Harry met them by the hall's main hearth and laid out the day's work in calm, clear words. One cold morning, he called them all to gather near the watchtower. Lyanna stood beside him, wrapped in her heavy cloak, her face bright with quiet purpose. Harry pointed to the frozen stretch of the Antler River, where the ice lay thick as a castle wall. Today, he said, we fish. Some of the wildlings muttered in surprise. A tall woman named Ragna, her hair braided in loops around her ears, scowled skeptically. The river's sealed, she said. You think to charm fish from beneath the ice? Harry smiled faintly. No charms today, just tools and skill. He bent and pulled back a canvas cloth. Beneath it lay several stout fishing rods he had made himself, and a heavy iron saw. Bran stepped forward and lifted the saw with a grunt. Sharp, he admitted grudgingly. Harry gestured to a likely spot near the riverbank, where the ice had frozen smooth and clear. I'll show you how. They watched as he worked, kneeling to mark a wide circle on the ice, then guiding the saw back and forth until a round slab cracked free. When he levered it aside, dark water gleamed below, steam rising into the cold air. You drop your line, he said simply, and wait. Some of the wildlings looked at each other in doubt. You don't need to believe me, Harry said lightly. You only need to try. By midday, 6 of them sat along the river, their lines trailing into the black water. Bran was the first to haul up a thrashing trout nearly as long as his arm. He lifted it in triumph, grinning like a boy. Ragnar caught the second fish not long after. Lyanna stood with Harry near the shore, hugging her cloak around her. They look happier, she observed. They're working for themselves, Harry said. Not just surviving. She turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. Do you ever regret it? Regret what? Building this place, staying. He considered the question seriously. Then he shook his head. No, not once. Later that afternoon, Harry led a smaller group to a low ridge half a mile east of the castle. He'd scouted it himself and found a broad seam of gray stone running along the slope. This, he told them, will become your cottages. 3 men stared at the ridge with resigned determination. You won't use your sorcery to shape the stones? One of them asked, not quite meeting his eye. Harry rested a hand on the cold rock. I could, he admitted, but I won't. Why? Because you need to know you did it yourselves, he said. That this place isn't mine alone, it's yours, too. They exchanged a look. Then, without another word, they hefted their hammers and began to work. The ringing of stone striking stone echoed through the trees. Each evening, when the work was done, the Flintfoot clan returned to Potter Castle. Harry always met them at the door, guiding the children to the kitchen where Lyanna would be ready with warm broth and thick slices of bread. He kept to his promise. He showed only a little magic, never enough to dazzle or frighten. If a blade dulled too quickly, he discreetly sharpened it. If a blister bled, he quietly healed it with a touch. But the rest, hunting, quarrying, fishing, he left to their own hands. When Lyanna asked why, he looked at her with a steady calm. Because I'm not here to rule them, he said. I'm here to teach them to rule themselves. That first week, Harry assigned the men to work the quarry by day, while some of the women, those who preferred it, gathered brush and firewood or helped mend tools. He noticed the way they watched him when he moved through the hall or knelt to speak gently to the children. They did not know what to make of him, a man who could conjure fire and stone yet spent his evenings mending fishing nets or building wooden cots. Lyanna helped bridge the gap. She sat with the wildling women in the evenings, listening to their stories of the far north, the glaciers and hidden valleys, the white bears and the endless stars. And she shared her own tales, of Winterfell's great hall, of her brother's sword lessons, of her own longing to see something more than grey stone walls. When the children were too restless to sit quietly, Harry set them to simple chores, feeding the sheep, carrying kindling, helping Lyanna knead dough for the next day's bread. By the second week, the children no longer looked at him with fear but with shy curiosity. One night, after the evening meal, Bran lingered by the fire while the others drifted to their borrowed beds. "You mean to stay here always?" he asked finally. Harry poured him a cup of hot water steeped with dried mint. "Yes," he said, "as long as this land will have me." Bran sipped in silence. "You're not like the Southerners," he said gruffly. Harry studied the man's weathered face. "I hope not." Bran nodded, as if that was the only answer he'd expected. Over time, a quiet rhythm settled over Potter Castle. At dawn, the men took up their tools and went to the quarry. The women and older children helped with fishing or tending the sheep. The younger children remained in the hall with Lyanna, who taught them letters with the same patience she'd used for Harry himself. At night, they all returned to warmth and food, 3 meals a day, every day. More than once, Lyanna saw the wonder on their faces as they realized the truth. For the first time in their lives, they were safe. No hunger clawed at their bellies. No rival clan waited in the dark to burn their tents. And she thought, as she watched Harry quietly mend a torn blanket or coax a frightened boy to eat, that perhaps this was what hope looked like, quiet and unassuming, growing like a fire from embers. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 22 Chapter 22 A Haven Beyond the Wall. Snow fell in a hush that muffled every footstep, every voice. By midwinter, the land around Potter Castle had transformed into something Harry hadn't fully intended but could no longer ignore, a haven. For cabins now stood in a neat arc just beyond the castle's stone wall. Each was built of thick grey stone quarried by the Flint-Foot men, their corners mortared carefully under Harry's supervision. But unlike any wildling hut or crude tent, these cabins had details drawn from another world: arched lintels over the doors, smooth floors sealed against the cold, stout fireplaces with polished hearthstones. And each had a marvel the new settlers never tired of remarking upon: a small attached chamber with a tiled floor and a clever pipe that drained waste away from the living space. "Like something the Undalls might build," Bran said one morning as he showed 3 new arrivals around. "But better." Ragnar snorted. "You just like the privy." "I do," Bran said firmly. "I'm too old to squat in a drift." Lyanna stood with Harry as they watched the first of the new families carry their belongings into a freshly finished cabin. She folded her arms over her belly, her expression soft. "They look so relieved," she murmured. "They are," Harry said. "They keep calling you the Great Sorcerer." His mouth pulled into a wry half-smile. "That wasn't part of the plan." "But you are," she teased. "Aren't you?" He sighed. "That depends on who's asking." In truth, he was no king, no lord. But every few days, another ragged band of wildlings appeared, some sent by word of mouth, others drawn by rumor. One late afternoon, as the sun died behind the ridge, a hunting party trudged up to the main gate carrying a skinny reindeer carcass. At their head was a wiry man with black hair streaked in gray. He stopped when he saw Harry waiting by the palisade. "You the one they call Gryffindor?" the man asked. "That's right," Harry said calmly. "They say you're a sorcerer. That you built this place in a week, with just your hands and your magic." Harry lifted his eyebrows. "Most of it was stonework and sweat. The magic only helps." The man grunted, glancing back at the others. "We heard there was room here, safe walls, food." "There is," Harry said. "But you should know, if you stay, you'll be asked to help build and tend this place. No raiding, no thieving. We look after each other here." The man rubbed a hand over his bearded chin, thinking. Then he nodded once. "Better than starving in the snow." "Then you're welcome." Over the next days, more came. A pair of sisters with 4 children between them. 2 old men who'd survived a failed trek to the Skirling Pass. A woman with hair white as frost who carried a bundle of dried herbs and asked shyly if she could help tend the sick. Harry tried not to think of himself as their leader, but the truth was harder to deny each time someone knocked at the gate. One evening, Lyanna found him on the watchtower, arms folded over the parapet as he watched the distant flickering lights of cooking fires. "You look troubled," she said, coming to stand beside him. He didn't answer right away. The cold wind tugged her hair loose around her face. "I wanted to help," he said finally. "But I didn't think it would become this." "A home?" she asked softly. "A village," he corrected. "With all the hopes and fears that come with it." She laid her hand over his. "It needed someone to start it." He turned his head to look at her. "I'm no lord." No, she agreed, but maybe that's why it works. Inside the hall, the newcomers were gathered near the hearth, bowls of hot stew in their hands. The children were already drowsy, their faces sticky with broth. Bran came up to Harry with a measuring look. They asked, Bran began, whether they should offer you tribute. Harry blinked. Tribute? For letting them stay? No, his voice was firm. No tribute. They'll help build, hunt, and fish. That's enough. Bran grinned, showing the gap in his front teeth. Told them you'd say so. He clapped Harry on the shoulder and went back to the fire. Over the following weeks, the rhythm of Potter Castle became the rhythm of the settlement. At dawn, men and women took up tools and walked to the quarry. Others checked the traps near the river or fished through holes cut in the ice. Lyanna began organizing the women to tend the sheep, mend clothes, and teach the children their letters in the evenings. And every few days, Harry met with the heads of each little family by the hearth to ask what they needed and how things were faring. One evening, Ragnar and Bran waited by the long table, where Harry was sketching a plan for another cabin. You should name it, Bran said abruptly. Harry looked up. Name what? This place. Ragnar nodded. The castle has a name, but the village doesn't. He sat back in his chair, frowning thoughtfully. What would you call it? He asked them. Bran scratched his beard. Something that means hope. Ragnar lifted her chin. Or something that means free. Harry was quiet a long moment. His gaze drifted to the window, where snow fell in drifting curtains. Then he smiled faintly. We'll call it Narnia, he said. Lyanna, who had been listening in the doorway, smiled back. By the end of that month, the word had spread up and down the frozen rivers. A sorcerer had raised a stronghold in the land beyond the wall, and there, if you were willing to work, you could find warmth, bread, and peace. For the first time in many lifetimes, something new was being built beyond the wall. It happened so gradually that even Harry barely noticed it at first. The cabins multiplied, for became 6, then 8, each built of quarried stone with fireplaces and tiled floors. The land that had once been an empty sweep of snow and pine began to show paths trampled flat by dozens of feet, the outlines of kitchen gardens marked by split rail fences, and the glint of drying fish hung on long wooden racks. Every dawn, the smoke of many hearths rose in thin gray ribbons into the pale sky. One evening, as Harry stood on the watchtower with Lyanna, he realized it at last. What is it? She asked, seeing the faraway look on his face. He turned to her slowly. It's a village, he said. His voice was low and a little astonished. A real one. Lyanna's smile was gentle. It's more than that. It's a home. But with so many souls gathered in one place, Harry knew the danger had only grown. One ambitious chieftain, one ruthless warband, one lord south of the wall looking to earn renown, any of them might one day turn their eyes here. And so, reluctantly but resolutely, Harry began the work of warding the land. On a morning when the sun was a cold white coin in the sky, he walked the perimeter with his staff in hand. Bran and Ragnar watched from a distance, their breath steaming in the air. Lyanna had asked him once why he did not teach the Narnians, she used that word now, as did they, about the full extent of his magic. He had thought a long time before answering. Because if they think I am all-powerful, he said, they will never learn to stand for themselves. And if they fear me, they'll never trust me. But this magic he would not hide. He set the wards carefully, line by line, stone by stone. A net of enchantments woven into the bones of the land itself, wards to cloak the settlement from those who bore hatred or hunger for conquest. Any with such intent would find their steps turning away, their minds fogged and aimless. And to any who came with honest need, the path would remain clear. When he returned to the hall that night, Lyanna was waiting by the fire. Will it hold? She asked softly. He looked into the flames. It will hold, he said. Each day he studied. The black family grimoires lay open across the long trestle table, their cracked bindings and iron clasps gleaming dully in the firelight. Lyanna sometimes watched as he turned the brittle pages, lips moving soundlessly over incantations and runes that no other soul in this world had ever read. Some were dark, even by the standards of his old life, rituals that bound a person's life to a single purpose, that reshaped flesh and bone, that bent the natural order like soft clay. But he was not tempted by their promises of dominion. He looked only for what could help, spells to ward, to heal, to strengthen. Late one night, Lyanna came upon him in the little library he had claimed for study. The candles had burned low, their light catching the worn hollows beneath his eyes. You should sleep, she murmured. He looked up from the grimoire, exhaustion and something brighter mingled in his gaze. I can't, he said quietly, not yet. If I am to protect them, all of them, I have to be more than I was. A week later, in a clearing behind Potter Castle, he drew a circle in the snow and stepped into it alone. He had found what he needed, a right that would lend his body speed, strength, and resilience beyond any ordinary man's. It required sacrifice. He slit his palm and let the blood spatter into the runes. A sudden wind rose around him, scattering the snow in whirling gusts. He whispered the words. When it was done, he fell to his knees, gasping, his heart hammering like a war drum. His veins felt alight with fire. But when he rose at last, he felt stronger, more capable. It would have to be enough. Winter watched all of this from afar. The white dragon had taken to spending his days in the hidden cave Harry had built. He had stopped hunting mammoths. Harry suspected the creatures had learned to avoid the valley entirely, and now he stalked the frozen sea to the north. Sometimes, near dawn, Winter would return with the half-shredded corpse of a whale clutched in his claws, laying it in the snow near Potter Castle as though offering tribute. The first time it happened, Bran had turned white as chalk. Gods, he whispered hoarsely. A leviathan. Harry had only sighed, rubbing his temple. I suppose, he muttered, we'll need to salt it. And so the great whales became part of the settlement's life. Ragna and the other women learned to cut the blubber into manageable slabs. The men carved enormous ribs to dry into shelters or simple fences. At the evening meal, a stew of whale meat and onions simmered in a pot the size of a cartwheel. Lionel looked around the hall that night, at the firelight glinting on all those watchful faces, and felt an ache she could not quite name. These were people who had never known anything but hunger and fear. And here, in this place Harry had built, they were becoming something else. Neighbors, families, Narnians. One morning, a delegation approached Potter Castle, 3 men and a woman wrapped in patched furs. They knelt at the gate as Harry came out to meet them, Lyanna beside him. My lord, said the woman, her voice rough from travel. They say you are the sorcerer who makes a place where no raider's hand reaches. Harry glanced at Lyanna, then back at them. There is no lord here, he said. Only people willing to work, and share, and keep each other safe. Then let us stay, she whispered. We have nowhere else. He studied their weary faces. Welcome to Narnia, he said at last. And Lyanna thought, perhaps this is what the world was always meant to be. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 23, Chapter 23, The Warden of Narnia. Lyanna had never imagined herself as a leader. But every morning, when the sun cast golden streaks across the snow-covered roofs, it was Lyanna whom the people came to first. A question about water collection, a dispute over fishing rights, a request for help finding a lost sheep. And always, they looked to her as if she held the answers. She had never been trained to lead, but somehow, she found that she could. Lady Lyanna, said Bran one morning, bowing his head with awkward reverence, the boys from the south field have been throwing snowballs at the sheep again. It's upsetting the lambs. Lyanna tried not to laugh. Then let them muck the pens as punishment. If they want to rile the animals, they'll learn to clean up after them. Bran grinned. A fair answer, my lady. That was how it always went. Fairness, kindness, steadiness. These were her tools, not swords or commands. Though she was barely 16, no one questioned her word. Not because of fear, but because of trust. And for the first time since leaving Winterfell, Lyanna was truly happy. Potter Castle became the heart of learning. The stone hall echoed with laughter and the scratching of charcoal on parchment. Children and adults alike gathered at the long benches as Lyanna stood before them, chalk in hand, teaching them their letters. A is for antler, she would say, drawing the shape. B is for bear. C is for castle, our castle. They listened with wide eyes, many holding a writing tool for the first time in their lives. Even the hunters, hardened men with sun-leathered skin, came at night to learn by firelight. Harry helped, of course. With a flick of his wand and a few softly spoken words, books multiplied. The children's books, colorful tales of brave rabbits, clever foxes, and magical forests, appeared by the dozen. These are gifts, he told the children, and one day, you'll read them to your own. Lyanna watched him, heart swelling. You know, she said to him one evening as they sat near the fire, you're more like a northern lord than you think. Except you build with magic instead of stone and sword. Harry chuckled. And you, my lady, are the true warden of the north, at least this part of it. She looked down, modestly. I don't command them. They come to me because I think they want someone to believe in them. Someone who doesn't look down on them. You give them dignity, Harry said simply. That's rarer than gold. Lyanna had always harbored certain prejudices about wildlings. Tales of raiders, of lawless clans and savagery, had filled the hearthside gossip of Winterfell for years. But those were not the people of Narnia. These people were eager to work. They learned with zeal. They took to crafts, leatherwork, stone carving, weaving, with natural skill. And many now knew how to read and write. They built their own homes with their own hands. They shared food, taught each other, watched one another's children. And slowly, the identity of wildling began to fade. They were Narnians now. Even Harry was learning. Late at night, after the children had gone home and the hearth crackled low, Lyanna sat beside him with a book of Valyrian script. This is a G, she said, tracing his hand. Loop and tail. No sharp turns. Loop and tail, he echoed. And this, she said, flipping the page, is Old Valyrian. The writing is vertical, like vines. He tilted his head. Beautiful language. Dangerous too, she warned. Words carry power. Harry smiled faintly. That's true everywhere, Lyanna. And so the two of them, sorcerer and lady, sat in the growing heart of a new world, one built not just of magic and stone, but of learning, hope, and quiet dreams made real. Narnia had its leader, and she wore no crown but snow in her hair and ink on her fingers. It was Harry who introduced the idea of public baths to the Narnians, one of the many customs he brought from his world, and one he insisted upon with a passion that startled even Lyanna. To Harry, hygiene wasn't a luxury, it was essential. He declared it the cornerstone of civilization, second only to clean water and food. And so, with the help of a few curious volunteers and a great deal of magical finesse, he built the first 2 bathhouses in Narnia. One for men and one for women, both made of sturdy stone walls, reinforced with magic runes carved deep into the foundation. These runes stabilized the warmth of the water, funneled from heated underground streams Harry had located through magical divination. Inside, there were wide pools that steamed gently in the cold morning air, lined with smooth stone and warmed to the perfect temperature. The first time the villagers saw Harry manipulate earth and stone with a wave of his wand, they gasped. Walls grew where there had been none, arches carved themselves into shape, and the very snow seemed to retreat from his presence. When he conjured a glowing rune above the entrance and spoke in an ancient tongue, the entire framework of the bathhouse sealed and glowed with magical energy. Whispers followed him wherever he walked after that. A true sorcerer. I heard he commands all elements to his will. Is it true he crossed the sky on wings of smoke? Harry tried to ignore them. He was used to being talked about, but he didn't like the stares that lingered too long. He especially noticed the way the wildling women looked at him now. It wasn't just admiration, it was hunger. A different kind of hunger than he'd seen when he fed the village after winter gifted him a whale. This was personal. Lyanna noticed it too. She stood outside the women's bathhouse, wrapped in a heavy cloak as steam drifted into the air, and narrowed her eyes at the group of young wildling women giggling in the snow. Their cheeks were red from the heat, their eyes shining, and each of them, it seemed, kept casting glances toward Potter Castle, toward Harry. You should have seen him bend the earth, one girl whispered to another. He made stone dance. He smells nice too, another said with a sly grin. Not like the usual men, like herbs and firewood. And he doesn't even look at us. Came a playful complaint. He's always with that Lady Stark. Maybe he's hers. Lyanna's face burned hot as fire in the snow. She turned quickly, her cloak flaring behind her as she walked back toward the castle. Inside, she found Harry in the common room, sitting on the floor beside the fireplace, a book open in his lap, his hair slightly damp from a bath of his own. He looked up and smiled. You're back. Tried the bath yet? I did, she replied, removing her cloak and folding it neatly over a chair. It's lovely. I'm glad, he said, nodding to himself as he turned another page. Makes all the carving and stonehauling worth it. She stood watching him for a moment, her hands clasped together in front of her. There were times when she wanted to scream at him. How could he not notice the way she looked at him? How she lingered near when he cooked, or how her heart pounded when he smiled at her that certain way, soft and warm, as though they were the only 2 people left in the world. But then her thoughts always darkened. She remembered the night Rhaegar left, the tears, the pain, the feeling of betrayal when Rhaegar never came. She remembered the weight of his crown of roses, the sweet scent that once thrilled her now made her stomach turn. Sometimes, she dreamed of Harry. In her dreams, he pulled her close, kissed her like she belonged nowhere else. He whispered her name as though it were a song. He made her feel safe, cherished, loved, but the dreams always twisted. In the middle of their closeness, his face would shift, those warm green eyes replaced by violet ones, Harry's smile distorted into Rhaegar's cold, too perfect face. She always woke up in tears, furious, ashamed. Now, she stared at Harry, who was humming softly while he read, completely unaware of the storm raging within her. Harry, she said softly. He looked up. Why don't you look at the wildling girls? She asked before she could stop herself. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. He blinked. What do you mean? They stare at you. Like you're some gift from the gods, she muttered, crossing her arms. You must have noticed. Harry laughed. I've been busy building half a village. I don't have time to notice if someone's staring. They're interested in you, she said, turning her face away. You could have any of them. Harry looked confused for a moment, then set the book down and leaned forward. Is that what's been bothering you? No, she said too quickly. Then, lowering her voice, maybe. Harry studied her face. Lyanna, I'm not interested in any of them, and even if I were, I wouldn't be someone who shares myself so freely. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't dare look at him, but her voice trembled as she said, "I'm not your wife, Harry. You owe me nothing." "That may be true," Harry said quietly, "but that doesn't mean I don't care. You've been through too much already, Lyanna. I'd never do anything to hurt you." For a long time, silence hung between them. Finally, Lyanna gave a little nod. "I know, that's why it hurts." Harry tilted his head. "Why?" "Because you're good," she whispered, still not meeting his gaze. "And I'm not sure I deserve that." He stood and stepped beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll build something where people do deserve it. Together. For the Narnians. And for ourselves." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Promise me you won't leave." "I won't," Harry said, his voice soft and steady. "I'm here, and I'm staying." Outside, the wind howled over snow-covered hills, but inside Potter Castle, the fire crackled and warmth lingered. Lyanna stood beside him, her heart still aching, but now, it beat with a little more hope. The morning was quiet, the snow glistening like silver threads beneath the rising sun. Beyond the settled borders of Narnia, far past the stone cottages and warm fires, Harry saddled a black mare with calm precision. The horse whinnied softly as he adjusted the reins and then turned toward the north, riding alone through the frostbitten forest paths toward a hidden clearing nestled in the rise of a broken ridge. This was where winter rested. The cave was massive, like a wound in the earth's bones, and concealed by ancient magic that bent the air and light. No one from Narnia ever wandered here. It was far enough that even the bravest child wouldn't stray so far. Harry rode up the last ridge, dismounted, and walked toward the shadowed entrance with slow reverence. Inside, the cave opened into a vast domed space, softly illuminated by faintly glowing runes etched in the ceiling stone. And there, resting like a coiled god, was Winter. The dragon stirred as Harry approached, his white scales shimmering faintly under the glow of the runes. His eyes, like liquid silver with slitted pupils, opened and fixed on Harry. The cold breath that escaped his snout curled in the air like mist. Harry smiled. "I missed you too, big guy." Winter rumbled, a low, throaty sound that Harry understood as a greeting. They had no spoken language, but their bond was forged through more than words. Harry's thoughts traveled through their connection like ripples in water. And Winter responded in kind, with instinct, emotion, and clear understanding. "You've grown," Harry said aloud, walking closer. "Westeros agrees with you." It was true. Since arriving in this world, Winter's size had nearly doubled. His wings were vast enough to darken a small field, his body coiled with powerful muscle beneath those pale, glistening scales. He was truly a creature of now more legend than beast. Harry reached into his enchanted satchel and pulled out a bundle wrapped in black silk. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a gleaming silver pendant, shaped like a spiral of interwoven runes, pulsing faintly with power. "I made something for you," Harry said, stepping close. "It's time you had a little freedom." Winter lowered his head curiously. "This," Harry explained, "is a runic pendant. It's linked to your magical core. When you channel your energy through it, you become invisible. Not just your body, your scent, your sound, your heat. Gone. You can fly in daylight now, without anyone seeing you." Winter blinked. Then, with slow grace, bent his neck further. Harry fastened the pendant around his massive neck. The moment the clasp clicked into place, the runes flared to life with a white-blue glow. "Try it," Harry whispered. Winter focused and in the blink of an eye, vanished. Harry stood in the center of the cave, surrounded by nothing but echoing silence. He laughed, lifting his hands. "Perfect." A moment later, Winter reappeared, and gave a satisfied huff, his wings shifting in excitement. He activated the pendant again and disappeared, then returned. The joy in his movements made Harry grin. "You like it," he said. "Good, you're going to need it." He turned to look eastward, toward where the sun was rising over the frosted treetops. "I need to go to Bravos," he said aloud. "I've only been in Westeros. I need to know what's out there. If there's magic, culture, ancient knowledge, I have to see it, for both our sakes." Winter snorted, as if already preparing for the flight. "But we leave in secret," Harry added. "Lyanna doesn't want anyone to see you yet. Too soon. The people aren't ready, not yet." Back at Potter Castle, Lyanna stood near the hearth, her hands resting on the curve of her belly. Her pregnancy was now visible, and despite the warmth of the fire and the comfort of the settlement, a shadow passed over her heart. She heard the stable doors close softly. She knew what that sound meant. She turned to see Harry enter, brushing snow from his cloak. "You're really going," she said, not trying to hide the sadness in her voice. Harry nodded. "Just for a short while, couple of weeks, maybe a month. I need to know what the world beyond the wall, beyond Westeros, is like." "You'll be flying," she said softly, looking down at her hands. "On Winter. No one will see us. I promise. The pendant works." "I don't want you to go," she whispered, "but I won't stop you." Harry hesitated, then stepped close and gently touched her arm. I've made arrangements. 2 of the older women from the settlement will stay here. They'll take care of you while I'm gone. I'll come back, Lyanna, always. Her eyes met his, and there was a weight behind them she couldn't hide. Just come back safe. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You keep things running here. I hear you've become Queen of Narnia. She managed a weak laugh. Not queen, just someone they trust. Well, Harry said, leaning forward to kiss her forehead, I trust you too. That night, before the moon rose, Harry vanished into the cave. No one in Narnia saw him leave. Winter curled down low, invisible to the stars. Harry climbed into the new saddle, sleek, wide, reinforced with dragon leather and metal fittings. It could hold 6 people easily, though tonight it carried only 1. Let's fly, Harry whispered. And with a mighty beat of wings and a ripple of magic, Winter soared into the air, vanishing into the sky like a ghost, carrying Harry across the sea, toward the ancient city of Bravos and whatever truths waited for him in the east. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 24, Chapter 24, The Sorcerer of Bravos. The free city of Bravos looked like a city submerged in water, its streets narrow canals and its buildings rising above shimmering channels, bridges strung between towers like threads of lace. From the sky, atop the invisible form of Winter, Harry was breathless. The sun glinted off the rooftops, and the deeper he gazed, the more intricate the city seemed. Bravos was a maze of beauty and elegance, unlike anything in Westeros. The salty wind whipped past him, and his eyes locked on the Titan of Bravos, an immense colossus standing guard at the mouth of the harbor, its raised sword seemingly splitting the clouds. Even from such a height, the Titan inspired awe. Its massive stone limbs straddled the entrance to the lagoon, its eyes ever watchful. Harry had seen wonders in his life, castles built by magic, creatures of fire and shadow, but nothing made him blink like the Titan. It was a marvel of mortal hands, not magic, and that impressed him even more. Winter flew silently, gliding above the scattered clouds. When Harry found a thick patch of forest and rocky shoreline outside the city limits, he gave the command through thought, and the great white dragon descended, its wings stirring the sea spray and pine boughs. When Winter's claws touched down, Harry slid from the saddle with practiced ease. The dragon remained invisible, crouching low behind a thicket of trees and mist, letting out a low, rumbling breath as if to say, hurry. I'll be back before sunset, Harry whispered, placing a hand on Winter's neck. Stay hidden. If anyone comes near, vanish into the sea. The dragon huffed, its golden-slit eyes blinking once, slowly. Harry removed his fur-lined cloak, now far too warm for the coastal humidity. He reached into his enchanted satchel and drew out a fine outfit of SSE silk, deep blue robes trimmed with silver, light boots suited for cobblestones and boat decks, and a thin traveling sash woven with protective runes in the thread. He took a moment to adjust his hair, now longer than it had been when he first left his world, and wiped the travel dust from his face using a conjured cloth. With a sigh and a sense of quiet anticipation, Harry began the slow walk toward Bravos. The road was quiet, lined with olive trees and flowering bushes, the sea always to his right. Seabirds cried overhead, and the air smelled of salt and spice. He could already see the domes and towers of the city rising over the water, and the sound of distant bells carried faintly on the wind. As Harry approached the great gates of Bravos on foot, he was immediately met with scrutiny by the guards stationed at the entryway. The gatekeeper, a tall, weather-worn man with a halberd and a chainmail vest glinting under the sun, squinted at Harry with disinterest. Travelers passed through all day, noblemen in polished carriages with armored escorts, foreign merchants boasting fine cloaks and guarded by sellswords, and even temple emissaries robed in the hues of their gods. Harry, dressed well but walking alone and unannounced, barely warranted a glance. The gatekeeper stepped forward with a grunt. Entry fee, 2 silver moons, he said, holding out a gloved hand. Harry raised a brow but did not protest. Causing a scene at the gates would do nothing but delay him, and besides, he had enough wealth hidden in the depths of his enchanted trunk to buy half the street if he wished. He reached into his coin pouch and handed over the fee without a word. The guard inspected the coins briefly, grunted again in approval, and waved him through. Inside the city, Harry was immediately swept up in the breathtaking beauty and chaotic energy of Bravos. Stone bridges curved over sparkling canals, gondoliers called out to pedestrians, and domed rooftops gleamed under the sun. The streets bustled with richly dressed merchants, masked courtesans from the moon pool, sellswords advertising their steel, and children darting through narrow alleys. The scent of spice, sea, and fresh bread mingled in the air, and every turn revealed something new: painted walls, hanging lanterns, minstrels playing flutes beside the canals. Realizing quickly that the city was far too large to explore on foot, Harry found a stable and purchased a sturdy Bravosee horse, a strong gelding with sleek grey fur and a steady pace. With saddlebags enchanted to lighten the load, he mounted and began his slow, curious exploration of the free city. His ride eventually brought him to a modest-looking bookstore nestled between a tailor's shop and a perfume vendor. The sign above the door read, "The Quill and Lantern." It was not much to look at, no glass windows or elaborate decorations, but something about it tugged at Harry's curiosity. He dismounted and stepped inside. The scent of old parchment and lamp oil filled the narrow space. Shelves made of dark oak lined the walls, filled with only a few dozen volumes. In total, the store couldn't have held more than 50 books. Behind the counter stood an older Bravasi man with graying hair and intelligent eyes. He eyed Harry with mild suspicion and curiosity. "Looking for something specific?" the man asked, his common tongue tinged with the musical accent of the city. Harry shook his head, stepping deeper into the room. "No, I'm buying everything." The man blinked. "Everything? All of it?" The bookseller laughed, thinking it a jest. "That would cost you 1,000 gold coins, at least. These aren't common stories for children. Each book is copied by hand. Ink, vellum, labor, it all adds up." Harry gave a small smile and reached into his enchanted pouch. "What if," he said slowly, "instead of gold, I offered you something better?" The man narrowed his eyes. "Better?" Harry pulled one book from the shelf, an old history of the Rhoynar Wars, and held it in his palm. With a flick of his wand and a whispered incantation, the book shimmered. One became two, the two became four, and in moments, 21 identical copies of the same book lay stacked before them. "They're permanent," Harry explained, watching the stunned silence on the man's face. "Indistinguishable from the original. They won't rot. They won't fade. They'll last for generations." The bookseller stood frozen, mouth open, eyes wide with disbelief. "You can keep the originals," Harry continued, "and I'll take one of each copy." The man staggered back a step, then suddenly rushed forward, examining the books, touching the pages as though expecting them to crumble or vanish. This is sorcery," he muttered. "Magic," Harry corrected gently, "and a gift." The man looked up at him, emotion trembling on his face, fear, awe, and joy all at once. "Who are you?" he whispered. Harry smiled faintly. "Just a traveler looking to learn." The bookseller bowed, not out of obligation, but reverence. "Then, my friend, you are welcome here any time. My name is Orlano, and you have just made me the richest bookkeeper in Bravos. No, perhaps in all Essos." And from that moment forward, Orlano became more than a merchant. Like many before him, he saw in Harry something more than man, powerful, mysterious, and perhaps fated for something greater. And so, he became the first friend Harry made in Bravos. As the final copy settled softly onto the counter, Orlano let out a long breath and shook his head, still reeling from the marvel he had just witnessed. Books that would have taken scribes weeks or months to replicate had multiplied before his eyes in mere seconds. With trembling hands, he latched the front door of the Quill and Lantern and flipped the sign to closed. "Enough commerce for one day," he said with a grin, already rolling down the awning. "You've done more for me in a minute than any patron in a decade. Now, friend, let me return the favor." Harry raised a brow, amused. "Your closing shop?" Orlano waved it off. "The books will be there tomorrow. But a sorcerer who can turn parchment into gold? That's rare. And I know Bravos like the lines on my own palm. Let me guide you." Harry smiled faintly. He could already tell that Orlano's motivation wasn't only gratitude, it was opportunity. It was always wise to be on good terms with a sorcerer, and Orlano, to his credit, wasn't hiding that. But Harry didn't mind. He needed someone like this. Someone who could show him the hidden doors behind the gilded ones. They began their walk through the heart of Bravos. Orlano, now in better spirits and walking like a man 10 years younger, pointed out every important guildhouse, artisan quarter, and known den of thieves with a mixture of flair and caution. "Don't let the silks fool you," Orlano whispered, gesturing to a group of jewel-cloaked merchants laughing near a wine-house. "Some of those men have fingers longer than their ledgers. You flash too much coin there, and your purse will be empty before your glasses." "I'm not worried," Harry replied calmly, his green eyes scanning the crowd. "Are you, like the mages of old?" Orlano asked with a slight tremor of reverence. Harry simply nodded. What he didn't say was that his skills and legilimency had advanced far beyond the casual probing of thoughts. With a single glance, he could sift through a man's surface thoughts and dive straight into memories, reading them, copying them, storing them with surgical precision. And that was the true purpose of his journey to Bravos. When they reached a respected forge tucked between an old spice warehouse and a marble bathhouse, Orlano stopped and whispered, "One of the finest smiths in Bravos. Makes weapons for sea lords and sellswords alike. Doesn't usually give tours, but you've got me." The interior of the smithy glowed with the pulsing red-orange of fire and steel. The blacksmith, a muscular Bravasi man named Gwillis, stood at the anvil hammering a glowing piece of metal with rhythmic fury. As the two entered, Gwyllis glanced up but said nothing. His face was hard, his eyes sharp from years of working beside flame and iron. Harry's gaze settled on the rack at the back. Among the steel blades, daggers, and axes, one item shone differently. A long, dark sword with ripples along its edge. Valyrian steel. Is that for sale? Harry asked, nodding to the blade. Gwyllis scoffed, setting his hammer down. Everything is for sale, for the right price. Harry approached slowly, running his fingers along the blade's hilt. In that moment, with a flicker of concentration, his mind reached forward, just lightly, and skimmed the surface of Gwyllis' consciousness. Memories bloomed before him, the folding of steel, the whispered forging prayers, the fine oil mixtures, the exact moment when heat and quenching sang in unison. All of it, copied and filed away into the vault of Harry's mind. I'll take it, Harry said. And a few others. I like your work. Gwyllis blinked, mildly surprised, but the weight of Harry's purse was undeniable. When the coins clinked on the workbench, even the hardened smith gave a rare nod of approval. As they exited the shop, Orlando couldn't contain his curiosity. You didn't even haggle. I didn't come for bargains, Harry replied calmly. I came to learn. The slave market in Bravos wasn't openly advertised, not in the free city known for its proud declaration that no man in Bravos is a slave. But Orlando knew the undercurrents. He knew where the boats docked quietly at night, where the masked intermediaries negotiated behind closed doors, and where wealthy patrons went when they sought skilled labor without question. They walked through the narrow streets of the Drowned Ward, a damp, moss-laced corner of the city where gulls screamed and the stone walls always smelled of sea salt and rusted iron. Orlando glanced behind them before entering a low-ceilinged warehouse guarded by two men in red sashes. Are you sure about this? Orlando whispered, the candlelight flickering on his face. They won't let just anyone in. I'm not just anyone, Harry said, stepping forward with a calm confidence. His presence had grown since he arrived in Bravos. There was a stillness to him, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Even Orlando felt it. The guards parted after Harry whispered a word and brushed his fingers against one of their mines, unlocking the door without needing a coin or permission. Inside, the air was thick with quiet tension. Rows of people stood behind iron bars, men, women, and children. Not one of them wore chains, but the collar around each neck said enough. Some had scars across their hands from years of tool work. Others looked clean, scholarly, even calm. Harry's eyes swept across the crowd. He didn't recoil in disgust, nor did he show pity. Instead, he observed, who here still held the light in their eyes? Who had skills, and hope, and fire left in them? A man at the front approached, wearing green velvet robes and a feathered cap. New to the market, my lord? He asked smoothly. You're in luck. I have scribes, sailors, potters, and shipwrights. Strong backs, quiet tongues, loyal with the right coin. Harry turned to Orlando. You said some of them are master craftsmen? Some are, Orlando whispered. Indentured, captured, sold by their own guilds. It's brutal, but true. Some of the best metalworkers in Norvos ended up here after a war. Harry stepped forward. I want the skilled ones. Blacksmiths, architects, glassblowers, carpenters, healers. Bring them all out. The man blinked, surprised. You'd take all of them? I'll pay, but they'll leave with me free, Harry said, his voice iron. No chains, no collars. They'll work for wages, not whips. The merchant raised his hands, half in surrender and half in greed. As you wish, my lord. They're yours if the coin is right. As groups were brought forth, confused, wary, and silent, Harry watched them closely. He used no magic at first, just his eyes. Then, discreetly, his legilimency passed over their minds like a breeze. He saw their lives, their trades, their loss, their rage, their hope. One woman had been a royal architect in Lys. One man, a blade forger trained in Valeria's dying traditions. A middle-aged healer had learned from Carthian monks. A carpenter had built entire ships that once sailed to Assai. Harry nodded, feeling the weight of their memories settling in his own. I'll take all of them. The merchant, nearly stumbling in glee, began scribbling notes. Shall I deliver them to your estate, my lord? No, Harry said. They'll follow me, as free men and women. As the collars were unlocked and the doors opened, silence swept through the hall. Many looked at Harry in disbelief. One of them, a young man with calloused fingers and soot-stained skin, stepped forward. Why? He asked in a hoarse voice. Why free us? Harry looked at them all. Because the world needs rebuilding. And I don't want slaves. I want a future, a home, a place where your work is valued. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. Hope, distant, fragile, but real. As they left the warehouse together, Orlando leaned toward Harry and whispered, You just bought yourself an army of loyalty. Harry didn't answer, but deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Narnia was rising, and it would be unlike anything this world had ever seen. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 25, Chapter 25, A Northerner in the Free City. As the last of the former slaves stepped through the glowing ring of the Port Kea, vanishing into the northern sky with a soft shimmer of blue light, Harry lowered his wand and exhaled slowly. The rope he had enchanted lay limp in his hand now, the magic drained from it with the final jump. Around him, the small clearing near Bravu's coast was silent once again, just the gentle rustle of salt-kissed grass and the murmur of distant gulls. He looked around to ensure no one had seen what had transpired. The Bravu had eyes everywhere, and though Harry had taken every precaution, caution was still his closest companion. Before sending them off, he had outfitted each person with bags filled with essentials, dried food, cookware, warm cloaks, even tools. Many carried packs of livestock, chickens, goats, and even 10 pregnant cows. The men and women had been armed with simple weapons too, nothing extravagant, just blades and bows that wouldn't draw attention and Bravus. With 120 people now safe inside Winter's magically protected cave, Harry felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, but also the tug of responsibility settled deeper into his bones. He could see the cave in his mind's eye lit with glowing runes, warmed with enchantments, and filled now with murmurs of awe and questions. Many had stared in confusion as the Port Kea took them, unsure whether they were being whisked to freedom or death. But they had trusted him. That trust, earned with words and kindness, now bound them to him more than any oath could. "I'll return soon," Harry whispered under his breath, eyes on the fading horizon. With a flick of his wand, he removed all the traces of people traveling towards Winter and began the slow ride back to the city gates of Bravus. His pace was calm, but his mind raced. There was still much to learn, and the Free City held secrets he hadn't yet touched. He passed by the towering statues of faceless gods and narrow canals lined with stonework houses. The scent of sea air mixed with spice and fish as he reached the bustling central market. Bravus pulsed with life. Musicians strummed lutes on bridges, mask-wearing courtesans whispered invitations to nobles, and merchants called out with exotic goods from Lys, Volantis, and beyond. But Harry wasn't here to revel. He passed through the crowd with purpose. There were places still to visit, temples of forgotten gods, magical apothecaries, even whispered rumors of a glassmaker who had once crafted mirrors that revealed more than reflections. The magic of the old world still lived in Bravus, buried beneath its canals and coin. Before nightfall, he intended to find it. And then, he would return to the north, with knowledge, power, and people who believed in him. The sun was setting over the canals of Bravus, casting a molten gold reflection across the water as Harry stood upon the terrace of a quiet inn, watching from the shadows. Below, in the merchant quarter near the slave pens and illegal trade, yet barely hidden, there was unrest brewing. He could see it in the sharp gestures of the slavers, the way they barked at their guards and waved at dockside sellswords, slipping them coin pouches and whispers behind cupped hands. "They think they can track me," Harry muttered under his breath, fingers resting on the wooden rail of the terrace. "They think they still own what I've taken." He'd seen the look in their eyes the moment he had bought over 100 skilled artisans without so much as blinking. Not one coin bartered, just a nod, and an outstretched bag of shining gold pieces. Of course the slavers would grow suspicious. No one parted with such wealth without a hidden motive. And now that he'd vanished with their finest slaves, blacksmiths, leatherworkers, potters, cooks, healers, they were reacting exactly as he predicted. From his high vantage point, Harry spotted a group of hardened sellswords boarding a small galley, iron helms and fur collars, the mark of Norvashi cutthroats. One of the slavers below pointed east, and shouted something across the docks. The implication was clear. "They're fools," Harry murmured, shaking his head. "Greedy, grasping fools." He turned from the view, retreating into his private chamber, where a mirror hovered midair, revealing the snowy haven beyond the wall. One by one, the freed men and women were settling inside the warmth of Winter's cave, lighting lanterns, feeding livestock, setting up sleeping rolls. Children laughed as a goat chased one of them, slipping on smooth rock. They were safe, thousands of miles away, and untouchable. With a flick of his wand, Harry dismissed the scrying mirror and whispered a command. The enchanted coin bags he had left with the slavers, illusionary gold formed from transmuted leaves and gilded stone, were now beginning to unravel. One by one, the coins would fade from solid to mist, the illusion breaking just as he willed it. He smirked. "That's why I didn't haggle, you bastards." Back at the docks, chaos was erupting. Cries of alarm echoed from the merchant vaults as gold dissolved like dust in water, and enraged voices screamed for guards, for scribes, for sorcery. One of the slavers, his face red with fury, was pounding his fists against the wooden crate where he'd stored his fortune, now filled only with grey ash. "They'll send more men," Harry whispered, conjuring his wand into his hand. "But they'll find nothing. Not the people, not their gold, not even my trail. And with that, Harry pulled the hood of his traveling cloak over his head and walked out into the Bravasi night, just another face in the crowd. Harry had just exited a Bravasi wine shop, his arms full of exotic bread, soft cheese, and fruit soaked in honey, when he heard his name echo across the cobbled street. Lord Gryffindor. 7 hells, it is you. Harry turned sharply, his wand instinctively brushing his palm beneath his cloak before recognition dawned. Striding toward him with a beaming face and a richly embroidered green cloak flapping behind him was none other than Wyman Manderley, heir of White Harbor and the son of Lord Whaley. The man was broad-shouldered and ruddy-cheeked, a northerner to his bones, though he wore SSE silk like a second skin. Lord Wyman. Harry grinned, genuinely surprised and pleased. Didn't think I'd be seeing anyone from the north this far east. Wyman clasped Harry's hand firmly, shaking it with both of his. You're damn right I'm here. On my father's orders, trade negotiations with the Sea Lord. But I'd rather talk about you, Lord Gryffindor. He lowered his voice, a glint of admiration in his eye. Word of your deed reached us months ago. Harry's smile faded into something more neutral. You mean Roose Bolton? Wyman said, tone dipping into something more serious, but not unfriendly. The man was a butcher of the worst sort. No one wept for him in the north. You know what they found beneath the Dreadfort? He leaned closer. Wildlings, skinned and strung like meat. The dungeons reeked of blood and rot. My father said it's a miracle the gods allowed him to live that long. Harry exhaled slowly. I didn't know about the dungeons. I acted because, well, let's just say justice needed doing. To hell with the law, Wyman said bluntly. We're in Bravos now. Westerosi law doesn't stretch across the narrow sea. The two men began walking down the street together, the Bravasi pedestrians parting for them as Harry's quiet presence and Wyman's noble swagger turned heads. Still, Harry said, glancing sideways at the heir of White Harbor, you're aware that I've made a lot of enemies by doing what I did. Wyman replied with a smirk, but you've made more friends. Don't let the silence of noble houses fool you. Plenty of northern lords are grateful. The Boltons were feared, not respected. Now the Dreadfort lands are divided up between houses Cerwyn, Tallheart, and Umber. No one mourns the Leech Lord. Harry nodded, lips tight in a thoughtful line. I know about politics, Wyman added, and I know this, men rally behind those who do what others dare not. You may be young, Gryffindor, but you're making a name for yourself. Careful, though, names echo longer than swords swing. Harry chuckled. Thanks for the warning. Wyman slapped him on the shoulder. Come on, I'll buy you a drink, and then you can tell me what in the 7 hells you're doing here, with the Bravasi saddlebag, and enough food for a wedding feast. Harry smiled. Only if you promise not to ask about the how Lord Bolton squealed. Wyman paused, blinked, then burst out laughing. Gods help me, I like you already. Wyman Manderley leaned back on the cushioned bench outside a Bravasi cafe, a half-unwrapped chocolate bar in his thick fingers and an expression of bliss across his face. By the gods, Harry, he said between bites, I don't know what sort of sorcery goes into this confection, but I'd marry whoever made it. Harry chuckled as he sipped a mild tea brewed with spices from ETI. It's called chocolate. From far away. I figured you might like it. Like it? Wyman gave a hearty laugh. I'd trade a whole barrel of Arbor gold for a basket of these bars. You might cause a war if you start handing them out freely. Harry grinned, pleased by the reaction, though he kept his usual caution behind his eyes. I'll make sure to ration them, then. Wyman's jovial tone faded slightly as he set the wrapper down and looked toward the busy canals. So, what brings you to Bravos? Thought you'd be gone deep into Dothraki Sea. Harry shrugged. Trade, learning, travel. I've been exploring. Wish I could do the same, Wyman muttered. Things back home are difficult. The winter has hit hard. Snow lies heavy on the roads, and grain stores are thinning. Only the coastal holds are managing, and even that's barely. Harry nodded in sympathy, keeping his thoughts to himself. Wyman leaned forward, lowering his voice as if someone might overhear. And the Stark name has been in enough scandal to fill a bard's scroll. Have you heard about Brandon? You mean Brandon Stark, Harry said carefully. Wyman nodded grimly. Brandon Stark, heir to Winterfell, once married to Catelyn Tully, threw it all away. Eloped with Barbary Riswell 3 months after the marriage. Disgraced the North. You know how proud the Tullys are. Hoster Tully nearly died of the shame. Harry raised an eyebrow. So what happened? Rickard Stark disinherited him, of course. Passed the lordship to Eddard. And Catelyn, well, she was still needed for the alliance. She married Eddard instead, though no one would call it a happy union. I've spoken with them both. It's cold. Harry sipped his tea again, his expression unreadable. And Brandon? Gone. Fled to Essos, with his Riswell lover. Haven't seen or heard a thing since they left White Harbor. There are whispers he's working as a mercenary, others say he's built a new life somewhere under a false name. Who knows? A man like him could thrive anywhere, if he can keep that reckless heart of his in check. Harry looked out at the water, thoughtful. What about Lyanna? Wyman sighed, the heaviness of grief touching his features. Vanished, same as her brother. Left only a note. Said she was running away with her mysterious lover, whoever that was. Some say it was a poetic lie, others think she was taken. Lord Ricard still has his men scouring all over the world. Young Benjen barely speaks of it, but I think he knows more than he lets on. There was a long silence between them, filled only by the sounds of Bravasi gondolas and distant conversation. Then Wyman clapped Harry gently on the back. Strange times, my friend. The realm is changing, and not always for the better. Harry gave a small smile. Then you must be ready for what comes. Wyman nodded slowly. And if you ever come to White Harbor again, you'll be welcome. You've got friends there. Thank you, Harry replied sincerely. I'll remember that. The sellswords returned 3 days after their hasty departure, faces red from the wind and mouths tight with frustration. Harry watched them from a quiet corner of the port square, sipping his honeyed wine with a casual ease that belied the sharpness of his gaze. Their leader cursed beneath his breath as he threw a satchel onto the cobbles and barked something about vanishing ghosts and wild goose chases. As Harry had predicted, there was no trace to follow, no trail to track, his people were long gone. It was time to return. But before he did, Harry found his thoughts turning to the north. He remembered Lyanna's voice, sometimes teasing, sometimes tired, and the wistful way she spoke of home. If she knew her people were starving while she lived in peace, it would crush her heart. Harry would not let that happen. He found Orlano waiting for him as always, leaned casually against a stone pillar near the fish market. I have a favor to ask, Harry said, handing him a heavy pouch filled with Bravasi silver. I need grain, barley, wheat, oats if possible, dried fruits, salted meats, preserved root vegetables. As much as you can get. Orlano whistled. For one of the free cities, or a small kingdom? Harry smiled. For the north. Orlano didn't ask questions. That's why Harry liked him. A day later, Orlano brought him to a grizzled sea captain named Torvin Marr, who commanded 20 massive whaling vessels, sturdy ships with deep holds and seasoned crews. He's an honest merchant, Orlano assured him, and more importantly, he keeps his mouth shut. I don't care about silence, Harry replied. I care about loyalty, and fast shipping. Captain Marr grunted. You've got coin, that buys loyalty and speed. Tell me the destination. White Harbor, Harry answered simply. Deliver the goods to Lord Wyman Manderley. The loading took 2 days. Barrel after barrel was rolled down the docks, crates stacked high with cured meats and sacks of grain sealed tight against the damp. The ships groaned under the weight, but they were built for the northern waters and the long, cold runs through stormy seas. At dawn on the 3rd day, the sails were raised, and the ships rocked gently in the morning tide, waiting for the signal. Wyman Manderley arrived at the dock just as Harry finished checking the last manifest. Lord Gryffindor, Wyman called, his voice rich with good humor. Or should I call you Bravasi merchant now? Harry turned and extended a hand. Call me whatever you like, Lord Manderley, as long as you accept a gift. Wyman's eyes went wide as he looked past Harry, at the great fleet behind him. 7 hells. You didn't just buy food, you bought a harvest. Enough to feed the North for years, Harry said, if it's rationed properly. The older man's mouth moved, but no words came for a moment. Why? He asked, voice lower now. Why do this? Harry paused, then answered with quiet conviction. Because I owe the North something, someone. He met Wyman's eyes. I am the one Lyanna Stark ran away with. Wyman froze, his breath caught. She didn't want Robert Baratheon. She didn't want a cage. She wanted a life of her own choosing. Harry smiled faintly. With me. 7 gods, Wyman murmured. I always suspected she ran, but I never imagined. He took a step closer. Is she well? She's alive, safe, free, and pregnant. Harry's voice was firm. She goes by Lyanna Gryffindor now, and she's happier than she's ever been. Wyman let out a slow breath, equal parts astonishment and relief. Then I'm glad, more glad than you'll know. She was a wildfire of a girl, no man could hold her, but if she's with you by choice, then you must be something remarkable. I don't want her name in the whispers of slavers or sellswords, Harry added. So I ask only this, if you ever want to speak with me or her again, send word to Orlano's bookshop. He'll know how to find me. Wyman nodded solemnly. And the North will never forget this. You've earned our loyalty, Harry Gryffindor. The 2 men clasped hands, and then parted without further fanfare. Wyman boarded his ship, and from the deck, he turned once more to see Harry watching from the dock. Then, with the wind at their backs, the ships slipped into the misty Bravasi Bay, one after the other, like a silver serpent coiling toward Westeros, bearing salvation. Harry turned away as the last ship vanished beyond the horizon. He walked to the same quiet alley he always used, placed a palm against the cold stone wall, and murmured a single word. Moments later, far beyond the city's edge, a massive shimmer spread in the air. Wind rushed. Snow greeted him like an old friend. Winter was waiting. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 26, Chapter 26, The Sorcerer's Homecoming. The sky tore apart with thunder as winter, cloaked in shimmering invisibility, raced across the clouds above the shivering sea. With wings that carved through the wind like blades, the great dragon soared with unmatched speed, his instinct pulling him home. Harry sat astride Winter's massive back, hood drawn low and one hand steady on the saddle. The cold bit into his cheeks, but he didn't mind. He was returning, not just to Narnia, but to something far more important. Winter roared once as the mountains of ice and shadow came into view, and then without a command, he veered toward his cave. Harry didn't expect what happened next. A scream echoed through the entrance of the cavern, then another. Panic surged inside the cave as the men and women Harry had rescued ran for shelter, hiding behind crates and stone outcroppings, clutching each other in terror. Some drew rusted knives, while others stood paralyzed in fear. One man, a former leatherworker from Myr, shouted, "He brought us here to feed us to a beast." Winter landed with a ground-shaking thud, causing a few crates to topple and a baby to cry out. His claws dug into the stone, eyes glowing like twin lanterns in the dark, and his breath steamed the air. His wings folded slowly, and he stretched his long neck toward the entrance, where dozens of frightened faces were frozen in fear. Harry dismounted swiftly and raised both hands. "Stop, all of you, please listen." The frightened crowd fell silent, their eyes locked on him, breath shallow. "This is Winter," Harry said calmly, stepping between the dragon and the people. "He's mine, my bonded dragon. He will not harm you, not now, not ever." A dark-skinned woman with tightly braided hair stepped forward, trembling. "We've only heard tales of dragon lords, that they're cruel, tyrants, that they feed the weak to their monsters." Harry shook his head. "Not this one, not here. I brought you here for freedom, not fear." Winter lowered his head until his snout nearly brushed the ground beside Harry. Slowly, the beast let out a deep, rumbling purr that vibrated through the stone floor. The sound was oddly comforting. Harry turned to the group. "I won't ask you to trust me today, but I will ask you to watch, and decide for yourself if I am the kind of man who would betray you." The tension in the cave eased, slowly, like frost melting from glass. A few people straightened. Others still clutched their makeshift weapons but did not raise them again. A child peeked out from behind a barrel and whispered, "He's beautiful." Harry smiled. "Yes, he is." By the next hour, the former slaves had settled again, and Harry could see signs of order in the cave, makeshift sleeping areas, stacked supplies, fires burning within stone circles. They had adapted. They had survived. That was enough. And then it was time. Harry led them from the cave, wrapped in thick cloaks of fur and wool, many gifted from the stores he had prepared. The journey toward Narnia began as the wind held overhead. Snow fell in flurries, and even though they had warm clothes, the bitter chill sank into their bones. Some of the women from warmer lands whimpered with each step. The men squinted into the wind, gripping packs and baskets tightly. Still, they marched. When Narnia's great wooden palisades came into view, a silence fell over the new arrivals. And it wasn't just awe, it was hesitation, fear. The wildlings were gathered on the other side of the settlement, standing in lines or leaning out of stone cottages. They had come to see the strangers, to watch the new blood enter their land. Murmurs spread. "Look at their skin, not from any tribe I know. Foreigners, SSE." Harry walked at the head of the procession, his boots crunching over snow and ice. Lyanna was already waiting by the gate, her hair braided into a tight plait, her fur-lined cloak clasped at the neck. Her eyes searched the crowd behind Harry and then locked onto his. She stepped forward. "Who are they?" she asked, voice low and sharp, but not unkind. "Free folk," Harry replied. "From another part of the world." Lyanna looked past him, her expression unreadable. "You brought them here?" They had nowhere else to go. The wildlings had fallen into complete silence. Men with spears leaned on their weapons. Children peeked from behind the legs of their mothers. And then a tall wildling man with red hair stepped forward. "They look soft," he said gruffly. Harry met his gaze. "They're not." Another wildling woman, gray streaks in her hair, but strength in her stance, asked, "Will they work?" "They already have," Harry said. "Some are smiths, carpenters, healers. They can help us, if we let them." Lyanna stepped beside him, her voice cool. "Then let them prove it, and we'll see." There were nods, suspicious glances, but no weapons were drawn, no voices raised. Harry turned to the people behind him. "This is your new home. Not all will welcome you right away, but that will change. You'll earn it." He raised his voice for the whole village to hear. "And let it be known, Narnia welcomes any who work, who learn, who build." and who do no harm. From the edge of the crowd, a young wildling boy approached and held out a piece of bread to one of the SSE children. The child took it shyly. It was a small moment, but it was the beginning of something vast. At first, the snow-covered village of Narnia stood divided, not by fences or walls, but by silence. The free folk of the north, the wildlings, stood warily at the edges of the settlement, watching the new arrivals from Essos with guarded eyes. These former slaves, strangers with sun-kissed skin and foreign tongues, came with little but their skills and their loyalty to Harry Gryffindor, and that, at first, was not enough. The wildlings were proud, hardened by the brutal winters beyond the wall, suspicious of outsiders, especially ones who dressed in strange fabrics, cooked unfamiliar meals, and spoke a dozen different dialects, few of which included the common tongue. But Harry was patient. He gave no orders, only opportunities. He walked through the village each morning, checking on both groups, never choosing sides. He brought the two blacksmiths, both towering men from Tyrosh, to the village forge, which had stood cold and unused for weeks. With a nod from Harry, they set to work. Sparks flew, hammers rang out on steel, and smoke curled into the frosty air. One of the blacksmiths, a bald man named Corin, spoke little Westerosi but knew how to speak through demonstration. He summoned a few curious wildlings with a sharp whistle and held up a newly forged axe, sleek, well-balanced, the metal gleaming. Strong, he said with a thick accent, handing it to a young wildling boy named Howrick. Howrick hefted the axe, eyes wide. Sharp as the crow's steel, he murmured. Corin simply smiled and pointed to the anvil. You, learn? Howrick glanced toward Harry, who gave him a nod. Aye, the boy said, stepping forward. And just like that, the first thread of connection was made. Soon, others followed. A husband and wife pair from Lys, once renowned carpenters before their enslavement, began to gather wildlings who enjoyed fishing. With broken words and hand gestures, they showed how to carve smooth wooden curves, waterproof boat frames, and bind the pieces tight with pitch and sinew. Within a week, 2 new fishing boats floated proudly on the icy river, and the wildlings who helped build them beamed with pride. They don't just talk, said a wildling named Hora, watching the boat sway in the water. They teach. Harry, standing beside Lyanna as they overlooked the activity from the porch of the stone house, smiled quietly. Because they want to belong, just like anyone else. Lyanna glanced at him, then back to the bustling village. They're not soft like we thought. They've lived hard lives, just not in the cold. In another part of the village, beneath a long shelter of wood and canvas, several SSE women sat weaving, spinning, and stitching cloth. Their nimble fingers danced across looms, creating garments warmer and finer than any the wildlings had seen. Curious wildling girls crept closer until one of the SSE women, an older lady with silver rings braided into her dark hair, looked up and smiled. Come, she beckoned gently, patting the space beside her. We make for all. Though the girls hesitated, one of them, a bold child named Yma, stepped forward and knelt beside her. The woman handed her a ball of yarn and showed her the pattern with patient, deliberate movements. Yma's fingers fumbled at first, but she watched closely and mimicked the weaving. That evening, Yma ran to her mother holding a half-finished scarf and laughing with delight. They know how to make the thread sing, she said. By the second week, the invisible barrier between the wildlings and the newcomers had started to melt. Children played together in the snow. Wildlings helped build stone cottages beside the SSE, mixing mortar and setting stones side by side. They'd learned how to shape the blocks properly from watching the newcomers work with precision and care. I never thought I'd see a wildling build a house that didn't lean sideways, Lyanna muttered as she walked beside Harry, watching a team of wildling and SSE men work together. They're not wildlings anymore, Harry said quietly. They're Narnians now. One evening, around a large communal fire, 2 blacksmith apprentices, Howrick and a young SSE boy named Darren, sat beside each other, laughing over a poorly made sword one had ruined earlier that day. Looks like a weak knife, Howrick said, nudging Darren with an elbow. It's for killing very angry bread, Darren replied, making both boys erupt in laughter. Lyanna stood nearby, watching the firelight dance over the faces of both groups. She didn't say anything, only smiled softly as the warmth of the flames blended with the warmth in her heart. Later, when the fire had burned low and the stars glittered above like frozen diamonds, Lyanna leaned against Harry on the wooden porch of their cottage. You did it, she whispered. Harry shook his head. They did. I just gave them the chance. You gave them more than that, she said. You gave them a future. In the snow-covered village that night, 2 people slept side by side, not as strangers, but as one. Life inside Potter Castle had changed in the most unexpected and comforting ways. The arrival of the SSE brought more than just skills, they brought structure. Among them was an elderly midwife named Mara, whose hunched back and leathery face concealed eyes sharp as falcons. She was from Lys, and though her speech in the common tongue was broken, her tone was commanding and her presence reassuring. From the moment she met Lyanna, she took charge of the pregnancy with such gentle authority that even the wildlings began to defer to her. A few of the younger SSE women, particularly those who had once served as housekeepers or cooks in wealthy Bravasi estates, remained at Potter Castle alongside Mara. They quickly set to work making the stone halls feel less like a fortress and more like a home. They dusted out the corners, hung thick woolen tapestries, mended the worn cushions near the hearth, and began preparing meals with spices and techniques foreign to northern palates. The food was simple but rich, and Lyanna found herself growing fond of the tastes of cinnamon and lemon in her porridge. Though Lyanna still insisted on cooking now and then, claiming she needed to keep busy, the SSE women gently insisted she rest. "You carry 2 lives now, my lady," Mara told her one morning, placing a warm, wrinkled hand on Lyanna's stomach. "You must treat yourself as a queen would." One evening, Harry returned to the castle just as the sun dipped behind the snowy pines. The air was sharp with frost, and a hush had fallen over the grounds. Lyanna stood at the threshold, expecting nothing more than a routine report from Harry's trip to the nearby village. But what she saw instead froze her in place. 2 dire wolves padded beside him, massive, majestic creatures with thick, silver-gray fur and eyes that gleamed with ancient, primal light. They were larger than any hound she'd ever seen, larger even than most ponies. Despite their size, they moved with eerie grace, silent as falling snow. Lyanna's hand covered her mouth in awe. "Gods, where did you find them?" Harry dismounted from his horse and scratched behind one of the direwolves' ears. "They came to me," he said simply. "I made a pact with them, a binding ritual. They're not pets, they're guardians. Sacred beasts of the north. I thought." He hesitated, watching her face. "I thought they should live here, protect the castle, protect you." Lyanna knelt slowly before one of them, who sniffed her hand and then nuzzled into her chest. Tears stung her eyes. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "The sigil of House Stark, and now they're here." She stood, took one step toward Harry, and kissed him. It was not a shy kiss. It was soft and slow, trembling with gratitude and something deeper that had long been waiting to bloom. The dire wolves circled around them, one lying near the hearth, the other watching over the windowsill like a sentinel. Harry was quiet after, touched by her warmth, his hand lingering on hers. "I'm glad you like them," he murmured. "I love them," Lyanna whispered back. "But I love you more." Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 27, Chapter 27, Wyman's Return with Salvation. The port of White Harbor, though once regarded as the greatest city of the north, stood in mournful silence under a heavy sky. Gray waves lapped at the docks, more out of habit than purpose, and the bitter wind held between abandoned cargo cranes and idle warehouses. Snow blanketed the wooden piers and stone streets, a thick carpet of white that was rarely disturbed. The few dockhands still stationed there moved listlessly, scraping frost from the edges of crates and sweeping ice from planks that hadn't felt the weight of foreign boots in weeks. It was not always so. There was a time when merchants from the Reach and the Vale would send ships bearing rich wine, velvet, and oils, and in return, White Harbor would offer salted cod, northern furs, and timber from the Wolf's Wood. But no more. The snows had grown too deep, and the rivers froze over early. The north, once proud and resourceful, now faced scarcity with clenched teeth and hollow bellies. No ships came. The wharves stood empty, and the longshoremen gathered in groups around fire pits that barely warded off the chill. Conversation was sparse, there was little to talk about beyond how much food was left in their homes and how long the cold would last. They stared out into the gray horizon, their eyes searching for sails they no longer expected to see. "Another day, and no grain," muttered Jarn the dockmaster, a man with a weathered face and thick white beard. His gloved hand gripped a mug of weak ale as he stood beside the bell post. "Even the Ironborn had the decency to raid us when the sea was still open." "Maybe the sea froze over too," said Halder, a younger dockhand, stamping his boots for warmth. "Or maybe they just gave up on us. What trade's left in a starving north?" Jarn shook his head. "Lord Wyman will come back. He took a ship east, didn't he?" "Bravos," they said. "The free cities VE got gold and grain aplenty. Maybe he'll bring something back." "Aye," Halder said. "Or he'll bring back debts we can't repay." The wind whistled mournfully between them, as though the city itself despaired. Then, like a whisper cutting through the gloom, came a voice from the watchtower above the port. "Sail, sail on the horizon." All heads turned. Dockhands leapt to their feet. Jarn dropped his mug, and it shattered on the icy ground. "Are you sure?" he shouted up. "I said sail. No, 20 sails." A heartbeat of silence passed, then an uproar. Men ran for the edge of the pier, shoving aside crates and barrels to see clearly. And then, there it was. A line of ships cutting across the horizon, their sails dark and heavy, their hulls proud and tall. At the head of the fleet was a great ship with a merman banner snapping against the wind, the personal ship of Lord Wyman Manderley. "The Lord's back!" someone shouted. "Wyman's returned." Jarn stood still, his eyes wide with disbelief as he watched the ships approach. That's not just Lord Wyman, that's a bloody fleet." And as the vessels drew closer, the people saw barrels and sacks on deck, hundreds, thousands of them. The banners of bravos fluttered beside Manderley's, and the people began to cheer, a sound that started as a murmur but quickly swelled to a roar that echoed across the empty harbor. Jarn sank to his knees and whispered, "The gods haven't abandoned us." From the deck of the leading ship, Lord Wyman Manderley stood tall in his thick green and blue cloak. His cheeks were flushed red from the wind, but his smile was wide. Behind him stood Bravasi merchants and soldiers overseeing the cargo. But Wyman had eyes only for the people of his home. He raised his hand in greeting, and the dockworkers cried out, "Long live the Manderleys! Long live the North!" Halder ran toward the ship as it began to dock. "What happened, my lord? What miracle is this?" Wyman looked down, eyes gleaming with triumph. "It is not my doing, lad," he said. "This is a gift from the gods, or perhaps from something even rarer, a good man with a kind heart and the power to change fate." "A good man?" Halder asked, wide-eyed. Wyman chuckled. "You'll know his name soon enough. His name is Lord Gryffindor." And the city of White Harbor, once quiet and dying, sprang back to life, bell towers ringing and gates thrown open, to welcome not just its heir, but hope itself. Lord Wyman Manderley stepped off the gangplank onto the stone pier of White Harbor with the pride of a man who had defied winter and fate. The crowds at the port roared with approval, dockworkers and townsfolk alike cheering as crate after crate of food and goods were unloaded. Yet, for all their celebration, Wyman's thoughts were fixed on one place, the new castle. He rode through the familiar white streets of White Harbor, his guards parting the way. The castle stair, that broad, winding road of white stone, awaited him. It was lined with people eager to see the return of their lord, and Wyman doffed his glove to wave at them, face ruddy from cold and travel. As he climbed the final steps, the sight of the new castle brought a surge of warmth to his chest. Its pale towers loomed above the city's white walls, the silver anise-green banners of House Manderley snapping proudly in the wind. He could see both harbors from the height, ships still being unloaded, and his city, his people, stirring back to life. The bitter quiet that had plagued White Harbor in his absence was lifting. The gates of the castle opened with a groan, revealing the merman's court beyond, with its towering doors flanked by two mermen of sculpted marble. Servants bowed low as Wyman entered, and the air within was warm with the scent of pinewood smoke and beeswax. The hallways were just as he remembered them, worn with age but rich with memory, lined with rusted swords, faded banners from wars long past, and wooden ship figures carved in the likeness of sea beasts and drowned gods. A servant greeted him at the inner gate. "Your Lord Father and Lord Ricard are waiting in the merman's court, my lord." Wyman nodded and made his way to the great hall, the click of his boots echoing against the lath plaster walls. In a quiet corner, he passed the hidden room that led to the secret tunnel beneath the castle stair, its sheepskin map of the north and Myrish carpet still in place. When he stepped into the merman's court, his eyes fell immediately on the three men waiting near the high seat. Lord Whaley Manderley, aging but still broad of shoulder, wore his sea-green cloak pinned with a silver merman brooch. His long white beard rested on his chest, and his cane leaned beside his chair. Lord Ricard Stark stood beside him, tall and composed, wrapped in the solemn grey furs of House Stark, his face unreadable as ever. At his side was his son, Eddard Stark, already with the stern eyes and quiet strength that the North would one day come to depend on. "Wyman," Whaley said, rising slightly with a proud but weary smile, "you've returned." Wyman strode forward and knelt briefly before his father. "And I bring more than myself, father. I bring salvation." Ricard raised a brow. "Salvation?" Wyman stood and turned to face them. 20 ships, filled with grain, dried meat, fish, fruit, livestock, and even medicines. Enough to feed half the North through the worst of this winter. It will begin arriving tonight. Whaley leaned heavily on his cane. "You made a trade deal in bravos?" Wyman smiled faintly. "Not exactly. I received a gift from a friend." "A friend?" Ricard asked sharply, his eyes narrowing. "He is the one who brought down Roose Bolton. He is the one who healed the Dreadfort of its rot. He is the man who took Lady Lyanna." Ricard's face twitched. "What?" "I spoke to him myself. I broke bread with him. He told me Lady Stark is safe and well, that she left willingly to escape a fate she could not accept. She lives in peace and comfort, and she is with child, his child." There was a long silence. Eddard shifted uneasily. Ricard turned away to stare at the flickering torches of the great hall. His voice, when it came, was low and grim. Lyanna's disappearance cost the North dearly. It affected the trade deal I made with Lord Robert Baratheon. Wyman's expression didn't waver. We had been struggling for months yet no one helped us. It is true that Lyanna eloped with him, but you can't blame her completely because she already tried to talk you out from the betrothal of Lord Robert. Now she eloped with this Lord Gryffindor. He seems to have more wealth than 100 southern lords, and he chooses to aid us freely. If he is Lyanna's husband, then he is already kin to the Starks. Ricard looked at Whaley, and Whaley looked at his son with pride. You did well, my boy. We will see that the food is distributed fairly. Wyman bowed his head. The ships are under guard, but I advise haste. If word spreads, others may come seeking what is not theirs. Ricard's voice was firm now. We will send riders. The North will not forget this kindness. And so the new castle, which had known only whispers and worry through the deepening winter, now echoed with orders, preparation, and purpose. The cold winds still held, but within those stone walls, the fire of hope had been rekindled. Lord Ricard Stark sat in the Merman's court long after Wyman Manderley and his advisors had left to oversee the unloading of the ships. The pale firelight flickered across the rusted swords and ancient banners decorating the hall, casting shadows that felt too much like memories. His hand rested heavily on the carved direwolf armrest of his chair, yet his gaze was distant, beyond the white walls of White Harbor, beyond the frostbitten coasts of the north, beyond even the vast sea that separated him from his daughter. Lyanna, his only daughter, had vanished. Eloped with a man no one knew. At first, Ricard had felt only fury, rage at her defiance, at her shameful letter, at the dishonor it cast over House Stark. But now, that same man had gifted the North with enough food to survive not just this winter, but many to come. 20 Bravasi ships filled with grain, salted meats, dried fruit, and more. The harbor that had stood silent for weeks now echoed with life and gratitude, and it was all because of that one man, Harry Gryffindor. He didn't know what to feel. Had Lyanna made the right choice? Had he made all the wrong ones? Ricard's heart tightened. He thought of Brandon, his firstborn, bold and proud, bound to duty yet cursed with a restless heart. Brandon had always loved Barbary Riswell, everyone knew that. But Ricard, stubborn and practical, had made the match with Caitlin Tully instead, for the good of the realm, for grain, for ties with the Riverlands. And what had come of it? Brandon had broken his vows, shamed his name, and fled to Essos with Barbary like a common exile. Disinherited, gone. And Caitlin, poor Caitlin, humiliated twice. First abandoned, then forced to marry Brandon's younger brother, Ricard's second son, Eddard. Ricard looked toward the door, where Eddard stood quietly in conversation with a scribe. His boy was a man now, lean of frame, quiet as snowfall, with the dark hair and watchful eyes of his mother. But he carried the bearing of a lord who had never truly known the North. He had sent Eddard to the Vale, to be fostered by Jon Arryn, to be trained among falcons and knights and southern customs. He had thought it wise. But when Ricard looked into Eddard's eyes now, he saw a man who stood between two worlds and belonged to neither. I forced them, Ricard whispered aloud. The words startled even him. I forced Brandon to marry a woman he didn't love. I promised Lyanna to Robert Baratheon, knowing full well she disliked him. And Eddard. I took his home from him and filled his life with other men's dreams. No wonder they ran. No wonder she left. No wonder he looks at me like a stranger. The chamber was quiet but for the low hum of wine through the slats. He straightened slowly, a man bearing more than his years. But the fire of a Stark still burned behind his eyes. He could not undo the past, but he could still act. He would not be remembered only as the father who lost 2 children. He turned to Eddard, who had now joined him in the chamber. Ned, he said, voice low, we ride north at first light. To Winterfell? Ricard shook his head. To every holdfast, every keep, every long hall of the north. To the Umbers, the Karstarks, the Dustins, the Tallhearts, the Glovers, and all the rest. Eddard frowned. All of them? Aye, we bring the food, ourselves. We show them that it is House Stark who has fed them, not Bravos, not the Manderleys. We remind them of the ties we share, blood, snow, and sacrifice. Ned hesitated. And me? Ricard's face softened for the first time in weeks. You will ride at my side. They must know their next warden. They must see you not as a boy raised in the Vale, but as a Stark of Winterfell. Ned looked down, troubled. What if they don't accept me? Then we show them why they must, Ricard said simply. And we begin by doing what is right, not what is easy, not what serves our pride, but what saves our people. Eddard nodded slowly, and something shifted in his eyes. Resolve, perhaps, or understanding. Ricard turned once more to the window that overlooked the bustling harbor below. Ships groaning with life-saving goods. Men moving with renewed purpose. A people slowly lifting their heads. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. Maybe a father could still make amends. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 28 Chapter 28 Storm over Potter Castle. The winter winds held beyond the thick stone walls of Potter Castle, muffled only slightly by the heavy furs draped across the windows. The hearth fire crackled warmly in the sitting chamber, where Lyanna Greyfindor sat curled on a cushioned bench near the flames, her hands trembling slightly as they held the parchment. She had read it once, twice. Now, for the third time, she mouthed the words in silence, lips barely moving, her eyes glassy with tears that shimmered in the firelight. My dearest daughter, Lyanna, I do not know where to begin, nor do I expect this letter to mend the hurt we both carry. But word has reached me through Lord Wyman Manderley, word of your hand, your heart, and your sacrifice. The food your husband sent has saved lives. The North will not forget. I was a fool once, too proud, too stubborn to see my children for what they truly needed. I see now that I wronged you, Brandon, and even erred in my desire to shape the North's future by my hand alone. You chose a different path, and while it wounded my pride, it saved countless of our people. For that, I am proud beyond words. I pray your days are warm and your child grows strong. Should you ever send word, know that my doors remain open, and my heart is no longer shut. Your father, Rickard Stark. Lyanna pressed the letter to her chest and sobbed, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming weight of relief. All these moons she had wondered what her family thought of her, whether they saw her as a traitor to the North, or worse, a bad daughter. But now, this letter, these words. She wasn't forgotten, she wasn't forsaken, she was loved. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned, wiping her tears hurriedly. Harry stepped in, his travel cloak still dusted with snow, a basket of foraged roots in one hand. Lya, he said gently, noticing her tears. He set the basket down and hurried to her side. What's wrong? She held up the parchment, eyes wide and shining. Nothing, I was reading the letter. Harry's brow lifted. From your father? She nodded, voice trembling. He thanked me, Harry, for the food, for helping the North. He said he's proud of me. Harry's lips curled into a soft smile, and he sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. I didn't want to burden you with it, he said softly, brushing her damp hair from her cheek. Lord Manderley and I spoke in bravos. I made sure to send food enough to survive for a couple of years. Lyanna blinked at him. The food, how did you send it? He nodded slowly. I hired the ships, bought every grain, every salted ham, every dried fig I could find. I thought of your people, Lya. I thought of your father and brothers and all those who would suffer. I did it because you love them. Her lip trembled again, and she buried her face against his shoulder. You didn't have to do that. You've already given me everything. A home, a future, a name. You are Lyanna Greyfindor, Harry said, holding her tighter. And this is your home now, but your heart still beats with the North. That doesn't go away. I want to go to him, she whispered after a long pause. To my father. I want to look him in the eyes and say, I'm sorry. I want to ask why he made the choices he did. I want to hold his hand and forgive him. But I can't. Not now. Her hand gently touched the curve of her swollen belly. Harry pressed a kiss to her forehead. You'll go one day, when you're ready, when the time is right, and you won't go alone. They sat in silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms as the fire crackled and the winter night deepened outside. The two direwolves dozed by the hearth, massive, shaggy beasts whose soft snores occasionally filled the chamber. And somewhere above, in the small tower chamber, the old SSC midwife hummed lullabies as she sorted swaddling cloths. Lyanna smiled through her tears, still clutching the letter. She wasn't just a runaway daughter anymore. She was a bridge, between past and future, between North and beyond, between House Stark and House Greyfindor. The skies above Narnia were cast in pale grey, the snow falling in gentle flurries that dusted the rooftops of the newly built cottages. Smoke curled from chimneys, rising into the sky like slender arms reaching for warmth. The settlement had grown, wildly, rapidly, perhaps too fast. From atop the ridge where Potter Castle stood, Harry Greyfindor looked down upon his creation with both pride and weariness. What was once a gathering of tents and hovels had become a network of homes, workshops, storehouses, and stone-paved roads. The newcomers, SSC, wildlings, and Narnians of every shape and tongue, continued to arrive by the week, drawn by the promise of food, warmth, and safety. But with every new soul, the burden of rule grew heavier. They quarrel again, said Myrrell, one of the SSC carpenters, standing beside Harry on the tower balcony. South Quarter this time. Gorn's people struck a boy from Horse's clan, claimed he stole an axe. Harry sighed and ran a hand through his tangled black hair. Was it proven? No, but the axe was found hidden near the boy's home. It's enough for Gorn's men to demand blood. Harry clenched his jaw. Tell them to meet me at the castle. No blood shall be spilled in this kingdom without my knowledge. Myrrell nodded and turned to leave. Wait, Harry added, his voice lower. Remind them both that the tools of Narnia are not weapons unless I declare them so. If they use them to harm, they lose the right to wield them. Later that afternoon, in the center of the castle, the Potter cast, named after the surname he left behind unexpectedly, was filled with tension. 24 men and women stood on either side of the hall, divided by allegiance and ancestry. Gorn's folk wore heavy leathers dyed in dark tones, with frostbitten faces and scarred hands. Horse's people, lighter in build, adorned with bone charms and painted cheeks, stood tall with defiant glares. Harry stood between them on the stone dais, flanked by the two dire wolves, their massive bodies looming in silent judgment. The fire behind him crackled and hissed as if echoing his mood. "This ends today," Harry said, his voice clear and cutting through the thick air. "No blood feud, no retaliation. You live under one sky now, my sky." Gorn, a burly man with a braided beard, took a step forward. "He stole from us." "Prove it," Harry snapped. "Show me the moment, the hand that took the axe, the thoughts behind it. If you cannot, you accuse a child on suspicion alone. Is that justice?" Gorn growled low in his throat, but said nothing. Harry turned to Horsa, a tall woman with narrow eyes. "And you, if you knew one of yours stole, would you return it?" "Yes," she said immediately. "Then return it," Harry said. "And teach your young to ask, not take." The boy in question, no older than 12, stood near Horsa, trembling. Harry approached him and knelt, looking the child in the eyes. "Do you know what I could do if I was a cruel king?" The boy swallowed and shook his head. "I could take your hand, or your home, or your mother's home, but I won't, because this land was not built for vengeance. It was built for change. Will you promise me to earn your tools, not steal them?" "Yes, my lord," the boy said in a whisper. Harry stood, gaze sweeping across the gathered clans. "This is the last time I will treat a feud like this with words. Next time you raise a tool as a weapon without cause, I will break that hand and cast you into the snow." The hall was silent. "No more axes buried in snowbanks," he added coldly. "If you need something, wood, food, stone, ask, share, trade, or walk into the frost and take your chances alone." He turned and walked down the hall as the dire wolves growled and patted behind him, parting the crowd like a blade. Outside, the snow had grown heavier. Lyanna waited near the entrance with her cloak wrapped tightly around her, her hands cradling her growing belly. "Another quarrel?" she asked softly. "Yes," Harry said, rubbing his eyes. "And it won't be the last." "You're doing the best you can," she said, taking his hand. "I know, but I'm starting to think it's not enough. These people lived their whole lives in hate and scarcity. They don't know any other way." "Then you have to teach them," she whispered. "Just like you taught me." Harry looked at her, and for a moment, the weight of rule lifted. Just a moment. And then the wind blew again, bitter and sharp, and he remembered that peace was not given, it was forged. Even though she was very heavy with child, Lyanna still walked each morning to the school built in the heart of Narnia. It had been Harry's insistence to establish a proper place of learning, and though Lyanna had never imagined herself as a teacher, the task brought her great joy. The school was a wide wooden hall, tall and airy, with large windows that let in the pale northern light. At the front stood a large board smoothed from dark pine, where Lyanna wrote letters and words using charcoal, wiping them away with cloth when needed. She taught both the children of wildlings and the SSE who had come to Narnia seeking a new life. Many of them were clever, quick to learn their letters, though there was no compulsion to attend. Any child who wished to learn could come freely, and perhaps even more importantly, they were fed during the lessons. A simple meal, stew, warm bread, or porridge, was often enough to fill the benches. Lyanna herself took pride in preparing the food each morning, with help from the women at Potter Castle. She enjoyed seeing the children eat with full bellies and then settle down to their slates, scratching out their first letters with grimy fingers and shining eyes. But on this day, something changed. As she stood before the children, charcoal in hand, a sudden sharp pain shot through her lower abdomen. It stole her breath away. She gasped and gripped the edge of the table, then slowly sank into the wooden chair placed beside her. One of the older children, a dark-haired SSE boy with wide eyes, noticed her discomfort. "Lady Lyanna?" he asked in a nervous voice. "I'm fine," she murmured through a tight breath, placing a hand over her belly. "Just, fetch help, would you?" The boy didn't wait. He bolted from the room, his feet echoing down the corridor. Within moments, the door burst open and two women rushed in, one of them the young pleasure slave girl from Lys, who had lived in Potter Castle since the day the SSE arrived. Others followed, and soon Lyanna was gently helped up and escorted out of the school, cradling her belly and walking with slow, trembling steps. The castle was close, but even those few paces felt like miles. Word spread quickly. By the time Harry arrived at the castle, Lyanna was already in her chamber. The doors had been shut tight, and the thick stone walls muffled the sounds, but not enough. Harry stood outside, pacing restlessly along the corridor, heart pounding. From beyond the door, he could still hear her cries, muffled yet raw with pain. He clenched his fists, helpless. One of the castle attendants tried to reassure him. "The midwife is with her, my lord. She's done this many times." Harry nodded, but didn't speak. He could do nothing. No spell, no incantation, no dragon's fire could ease what Lyanna was enduring. He pressed his forehead against the cold stone wall and whispered, "Please be safe. Please." Inside the room, Lyanna gritted her teeth and bore down through wave after wave of agony, her fingers crushing the blanket beneath her, her breath sharp and ragged. The old midwife barked steady instructions while two young women moved about the room with towels and hot water. Through it all, Lyanna thought only of one thing, her child. And outside the door, Harry waited, praying silently that the woman he loved and the life she carried would survive the night. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 29, Chapter 29, The Birth of Sirius Gryffindor. The screams had stopped. For a moment, silence reigned inside Potter Castle. The thick wooden door remained shut, and Harry stood unmoving, his hand resting on the stone wall beside it, heart pounding like a war drum. His knuckles were white from how tightly he clenched his fist. Then, at last, the latch clicked. The door creaked open, and the old midwife stepped out, her wrinkled face pale with sweat, her apron stained red. But in her arms, wrapped in soft furs, was a child, a newborn, alive and squirming. "He lives," the midwife whispered, breathless. "Your son." Harry blinked. The midwife stepped forward and placed the bundle in his arms. A small, warm weight pressed into his chest. The baby let out a soft, mewling cry and squirmed under the folds of his swaddling. Harry gently moved the fabric aside and stared. The child's hair was impossibly white, soft as snowdrift, already thick atop his small head. When he blinked, Harry saw eyes the color of crushed amethysts, Targaryen eyes. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, holding the boy, breathing in the scent of newborn skin and blood and milk, and for a long, fragile moment, the world narrowed to just this child. The resemblance to Rhaegar was faint, but there, Harry recognized it. And yet, "I am not the kind of man who judges a child for the blood he bears," Harry whispered to himself, brushing his finger gently across the boy's cheek. "You're mine now, my son." But the moment was broken when the midwife stepped closer, her expression turning grave. "My lord," she said softly, "there is more. Lady Lyanna, the bleeding won't stop. We've tried all we can." "What?" Harry's voice was sharp, laced with panic. "We've packed it, applied pressure. But it's too much. Her body is exhausted. We don't think she'll last the night unless a miracle happens." Harry didn't hesitate. He turned and ran down the hall, his boots echoing off the stone. He burst into his chambers and flung open a wooden chest near the hearth. There it was, still intact after all these years. The tiny, beaded moleskin pouch Hermione had once carried across war-torn Britain. "Undetectable extension charm," he muttered, fumbling with his wand, and then reached inside. His arm disappeared up to the elbow. "Essence of Dittany, where is it?" His fingers brushed against cool glass. He pulled it out, a small bottle, glowing faintly in the firelight. He didn't even wait to close the pouch. He turned and sprinted back through the corridors, shouting, "Move, get out of the way." He shoved the door open, where the women inside turned, startled by his return. Lyanna lay pale and limp on the bed, her chest rising with shallow breaths. Blood soaked the sheets beneath her. "Use this," Harry said, thrusting the bottle into the midwife's hands. "A few drops, on the wound." The old woman gave him a look, unsure. "Do it," Harry growled. She nodded and moved quickly. With practiced hands, she uncorked the vial and dripped the silvery liquid along the worst of Lyanna's tearing. A faint sizzling sound filled the room. Then, gasps. Before their eyes, the torn skin knit together, the swelling vanished, the blood slowed, then stopped. One of the younger women pressed a clean cloth against Lyanna's side, then pulled it back, eyes wide. "There's nothing," she whispered. "Nothing, not even a mark." The midwife looked at Harry, awe shining in her eyes. "By the seven, or whatever gods you serve, what is that potion?" Harry only exhaled in relief. "Something from a time long past. It saved my life once. Now it's saved hers." Lyanna was still unconscious, her lips pale, but her breathing was stronger now, more even. Harry walked slowly to her side, still carrying the baby. He looked down at her, his voice soft. "You gave me everything," he said. "I won't let you leave me." He sat beside the bed, one hand holding hers, the other cradling their child. And in that quiet chamber, for the first time in hours, peace returned to Potter Castle. The first rays of dawn spilled through the narrow windows of Potter Castle, casting a soft glow over the firs and stone walls. The chamber was quiet save for the slow crackling of the hearth and the quiet rustle of cloth as Lyanna stirred from her long sleep. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief, blissful moment, she remembered nothing but warmth. Then she heard the soft whimper of a child. She turned her head, and there he was, her son, swaddled in blankets, resting peacefully in the cradle beside the bed. Lyanna sat up slowly, her muscles weak but her heart suddenly racing. She reached over with trembling hands and lifted the child. He was so small, so delicate, and so unmistakably Targaryen. Lyanna's breath caught in her throat as the firelight caught his silvery white hair. It shimmered like moonlight. And when he opened his eyes, those haunting, noble eyes, they were deep purple, unmistakably Valyrian, unmistakably Rhaegar. Her heart sank. "No," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, not this." She held him closer, burying her face in his soft head of hair, trying to force herself to feel the love she wanted to feel, but the ache in her chest deepened. She had hoped, prayed, that the child would bear even a sliver of her stark blood. Dark hair, gray eyes, something that said mine, something that Harry could look at and see his. But no, anyone who looked upon this child would know exactly who his father was. Rhaegar. And she would be reminded of him every day, in every glance, every smile, every tear the child shed. Later that morning, Harry entered the room quietly. He carried a tray with fresh bread, stewed oats, and a small mug of warm goat's milk. He paused in the doorway when he saw her, sitting in the chair beside the fire, cradling the child. At first, he smiled, but then he saw the way her shoulders shook. He set the tray down and knelt beside her. "Lyanna," he said gently, "what's wrong?" She didn't answer at first, just pressed her face into the child's swaddle and let out a soft sob. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I should be happy. He's alive, he's healthy, but every time I look at him, I see him." Harry's jaw tensed. He reached out and stroked her hand, careful and slow. "You don't have to apologize for how you feel," he said. "This wasn't something you chose." "I didn't want this," she breathed. "I didn't want to raise a boy who looks just like Rhaegar Targaryen. What happens when he grows up? When he rides a horse like him, sings like him, speaks Valyrian like him? What happens when everyone knows?" Harry was quiet for a long moment. "I saw you take care of him," he said. "You rocked him gently. You kissed his forehead. That was real. You already love him, Lyanna, but you're afraid." She nodded. "I'm terrified. If Rhaegar finds out, if he learns that his son lives." "He won't," Harry said, voice firm. "And even if he does, he won't have him. Because that child is ours, Lyanna, not his." She looked up at him then, searching his face, tears streaking down her cheeks. "But how, Harry?" she whispered. "How can I make him ours?" Harry stood slowly and walked to the chest at the foot of the bed. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound book, aged and marked with faded runes. He opened it carefully and turned to a page he had read many times before. "There's a ritual," he said softly. "An ancient form of magical blood adoption. It's not a trick. It's real. It rewrites the child's very essence, his lineage, his blood, his name." Lyanna blinked. "You mean, he'd become your son? By magic?" "Yes. He'll bear my blood, my magic, my name. And the magic will protect him. No one who meets him will see Rhaegar Targaryen. They'll see our child." Her lips trembled. "Is it safe?" Harry nodded. "It's gentle. It requires consent from both of us. The child must be named at the same time the ritual is performed. After that, no spell, no blood test, no vision will ever reveal another truth. Not even a god could tell." Silence fell between them for a long while. Then Lyanna looked down at the boy in her arms. His eyes were open now, blinking slowly, filled with innocence and unknowing trust. "What name will we give him?" she asked quietly. Harry met her eyes and said, "Whatever name you choose." The forest was deep and silent, its snow-blanketed floor disturbed only by the crunch of 3 sets of boots. Harry, Lyanna, and the child swaddled in her arms. They had left behind the crowded cottages of Narnia, where the great weirwood tree, though sacred, was no longer secluded. Too many had begun to gather around it, to pray, to whisper wishes, to sit beneath its crimson canopy. There was no longer any privacy, no longer any quiet for what Harry planned to do. This ritual, sacred, ancient, and intimate, demanded solitude. They walked for over an hour through the frostbitten wilderness, until at last, a smaller clearing revealed itself beyond a ridge of sleeping pines. In the middle stood a great weirwood tree, its white bark etched with the face of the old gods, and its blood-red leaves whispering softly in the wind. The tree was older than Narnia itself. Waiting there already, crouched near a stone outcropping, was Winter, Harry's mighty white-scaled dragon. The male beast raised his head at their approach, his piercing sapphire eyes falling on the bundle in Lyanna's arms. His rumble was low and reverent, a sound more felt than heard. "He knows," Harry said softly. Lyanna nodded. "He always knows." Winter stepped closer, lowering his massive head and gently sniffing the child. He exhaled a warm puff of breath, coiling around the edge of the clearing like a silent sentinel, his wings folded close to his sides. His massive presence made the sacred space feel protected, enclosed, as if the old gods and dragons watched together. Harry unslung his satchel and approached the base of the weirwood. With a flick of his wand, he melted the snow in a wide circle around its roots, revealing the dark, frozen earth. From his pouch, he drew the sacred ingredients: powdered bone, salt, ash, and crushed elderflowers. He began to draw the ritual circle, careful and precise, muttering words in the old tongue that twisted the air around him. 2 bulls, gifted by the SSC settlers, stood nearby, calm as if enchanted. Harry approached with respect and whispered a blessing. With a swift movement, he ended their lives painlessly, letting their blood seep into the circle, staining the runes. Then, Winter stepped forward. The great dragon used a single claw to slice a shallow line along his forearm, letting a few heavy drops of glowing blood fall into the center. It sizzled against the ground, powerful, primal, draconic. Harry and Lyanna knelt opposite each other. Each held a silver dagger. As one, they made matching cuts across their palms and let their blood drip into the runes. The air shimmered with power. The weirwood leaves trembled. Harry raised his wand. By blood freely given, and bond willingly formed, let name, flesh, and soul be rewritten. Let essence be replaced, and the child reborn. The ground trembled. The weirwood face began to weep red sap. The baby at the center of the circle glowed, first silver, then crimson, then emerald. Lyanna gasped as the transformation began. The child's silver-white hair slowly drifted down like feathers, vanishing in the wind. In its place, locks of messy, wild black hair began to sprout. Harry's hair. The boy's purple eyes shimmered, then deepened, turning to brilliant, unmistakable emerald green. His cheeks grew rounder. His skin took on a warmer tone. His face, still so small, so new, reshaped itself to resemble Harry. Lyanna's breath caught. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. It worked, Harry whispered, barely daring to believe it. Lyanna reached out, cradling the baby close to her chest. He's beautiful, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. And now, he's ours. She looked up at Harry, eyes shining. I want to name him Sirius, she said, after your godfather, for his bravery, and because I want our son to grow up with that strength in his name. Harry's lips parted in surprise. Then he nodded, swallowing hard. Sirius Gryffindor, son of Harry and Lyanna. At that moment, the weirwood tree gave a groan, deep and creaking. A slender strip of bark, long and slightly curved, fell from its side, landing with a soft thud beside the baby's feet. Harry stared at it for a long moment. Lyanna noticed too. It's a sign, she murmured. From the gods. They've accepted him. Harry bent down, lifted the weirwood bark in both hands, and examined it. It's perfect, he said, feeling the smooth weight of it. I'll make a wand from this. When he's old enough, it will be his. Carved from the tree that gave him a new life. Lyanna held Sirius close, and Winter lowered his great head again, brushing the tip of his snout against the newborn. The ritual was complete, and beneath the eyes of the old gods, a new Gryffindor had been born. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 30, Chapter 30, A Feast for a New Dawn. It began with a single horn blown from the watchtower above Potter Castle. The long, rolling sound echoed across the snow-covered valley, bouncing off the cliffs and trees. It was the signal Harry had ordered, a call to celebration. The child of Narnia's rulers, Sirius Gryffindor, had been reborn, and Harry would not let the moment pass without rejoicing. For the first time in months, laughter returned to the cold wind of the north. Harry stood atop the castle steps, his emerald eyes gazing over the settlement. 7 days, he declared to the assembled crowd. 7 days of warmth, food, and festivity, for every man, woman, and child of Narnia. Let the birth of Sirius be the beginning of joy. Cheers erupted. Children screamed and ran. Someone began to beat a drum. Inside the large hall of the old keep, cooks, both wildlings and SSC, scrambled to prepare what would become the most lavish feast Narnia had ever seen. Smoke and spice filled the air. The wildlings, who once knew only how to roast meat on sticks, now marveled at the strange new concoctions emerging from iron ovens and clay pots. Try this, said Ashla, one of the SSC women who'd once served as a royal chef in a distant city-state. She handed a steaming bowl of orange-glazed hair to a wide-eyed wildling boy. It's sweet, made with fruit syrup and salted meat. The boy blinked. No fireburn? No fireburn, Ashla laughed. This is what we call real food. Meanwhile, Harry oversaw the food duplication spell behind the scenes in the alchemy room he had built beneath the castle. From an old black family journal, he had discovered the secrets of duplicating food, not conjuring it, which was impossible, but perfectly mirroring it using an alchemic spell. A bowl of hot venison stew, a platter of herb-roasted potatoes, and bread stuffed with garlic and cheese, each dish duplicated 1,000-fold. The spell was etched into enchanted plates, and as one emptied, another filled itself nearby. Harry chuckled to himself as he watched the process. Sirius, my son, he whispered, smiling, you brought a feast greater than this world has ever seen. By the second day, the settlement of Narnia swelled to over 500 souls, with many newcomers coming from nearby forests and villages just to join in the celebration. Every home burned bright with firelight, every stomach was full. Visitors lined up to see the newborn, a small, wild-haired infant wrapped in soft woolen cloth, who already squirmed and grabbed with curious little hands. The first to visit were the SSC settlers, who bowed respectfully at the door of Potter Castle and were welcomed inside by Lyanna herself. They came bearing gifts wrapped in silk, carved from wood and stone, or filled with sweetmeats and dried spices. One older SSC woman, Marla, knelt before Lyanna. "May this child grow strong and wise," she said in broken northern tongue, "and may he never hunger, never fear." Lyanna smiled, her eyes warm but tired. "Thank you, Marla. You have cared for us all as if we were kin." Later came the wildlings, slower and more hesitant. Gift-giving was not their custom, but they had watched the SSC and would not be outdone. One by one, they approached with fur-lined cloaks, carved toys made of driftwood, antler rattles, and even a stuffed bear made from old woolen scraps. A boy of 9, his nose red with cold, stepped forward and offered a single stone he polished to a shine. "It's smooth, like the sky," he said. "I found it for him." Harry knelt and took the stone. "Thank you. He'll keep this near his bed. You've given him his first treasure." By the 5th day, music filled the snowy roads of Narnia. Fiddlers played in the great square, and wildling drummers joined SSC flutists in a clashing, lively rhythm that echoed all the way to the cliffs. Lyanna, still weak from childbirth, sat bundled on a cushioned chair near the hall's fire, Sirius nestled in her arms. Her eyes roamed the scene beyond the open doors, dancing, feasting, people of different worlds laughing together. "You've changed them," she said to Harry softly. Harry glanced at her, his arm behind her shoulders. "No, they changed for themselves. All they needed was the chance." Lyanna turned her gaze to the baby, who blinked up at her, his green eyes bright. "He'll never be hungry, he'll never be cold, and he'll grow up knowing both love and peace." A shout from outside drew their attention. One of the wildling hunters burst through the gate, a grin stretched across his windburned face. "More people comin' in from the south. They heard about the baby and the food." Harry stood. "Let them in, all of them. Narnia is open." That night, under the shimmering lights of the aurora that danced above the mountains, a final song was sung in the name of Sirius Gryffindor. Children tossed snowflakes into the sky, couples danced in the warmth of braziers, and Lyanna whispered promises to the sleeping child. And at the edge of the clearing, where the weirwood tree stood tall in silence, Winter the dragon curled around its roots, watching over them all. The sun had barely risen over the snow-draped pines of Narnia when Harry stepped into the deep chamber beneath Potter Castle, his private sanctum, magically reinforced with enchantments that warded off intruders and muffled all sound. The chamber was illuminated by glowing orbs suspended in midair, casting a warm golden hue over the magical trunk that stood in the center. The trunk wasn't an ordinary container. It was a 7-layered, magically expanded vault he got from Gringotts. The goblins had transferred every artifact, relic, and treasure from his inheritance into this dimensional space. He'd barely scratched the surface so far, only ever retrieving gold and books. But today, he wanted to explore. Harry drew his wand and tapped the silver crest on the trunk's surface. The trunk emitted a low hum as it unfolded, the first layer revealing a spiral staircase descending into the depths of magical space. He stepped down slowly, each level greeting him with different textures and aromas: aged leather, polished steel, ancient parchment, potion fumes, and cold gold. When he reached the 3rd level, he paused. This was where the lesser vaults had been arranged. A shimmering, transparent plaque hovered in the air, bearing names etched in old family script: Orion Black, Arcturus Black, Alphard Black, Charles Potter, Fleamont Potter, Sirius Black, James Potter, Doria Black Potter, and many others. Harry counted 22 vault names, including 2 labeled only by initials, BB and MP. "Many of these names I don't even recognize," Harry muttered, brushing his fingers along the edges of the floating plaques. How much did they hide away? He moved deeper into the glowing storage halls, past towering magical ingredients collection and glass cases of potions. On a nearby platform sat gold and silver bars, some nearly the length of his forearm, carefully stacked and sealed with the sigils of both Gringotts and the Ministry of Magic. Ancient dinnerware carved from gold, goblets studded with sapphires, and enchanted silver knives that never dulled were arranged in display drawers. He picked up a dagger and tested the weight in his hand. Still perfectly balanced, he murmured. Enchanted silver, probably good against werewolves. Behind another shelf were racks of armor, some pristine and gleaming, others dented and scarred from battles long past. One had a crest Harry had never seen before, a raven perched on a wand, wrapped in serpents. A forgotten black cousin, perhaps? It was then that something odd caught his eye: 3 small leather satchels, dusty and tucked behind a row of enchanted scroll tubes. He reached out and unlatched the first one. Inside, nestled in soft red velvet, was a camera, a magical one, sleek and made of dark wood with silver trims. The lenses glinted in the orb light. When he opened the other 2 pouches, they contained similar models, each uniquely marked with initials: SB, FP, AB, Sirius Black, Fleamont Potter, Alphard Black. Harry blinked. They each had magical cameras. He ran his fingers along the mechanisms. Despite the dust and age, they were remarkably well preserved. The enchantments had faded slightly, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. I could fix this, Harry said aloud. We could finally take pictures of the castle of Sirius. He carefully laid them out on a rune-marked table and pulled out a jar of clockmaker's oil, phoenix feather dust, and a few drops of dragon blood, all potent magical reagents. With slow, deliberate care, he whispered the repair incantations passed down through the Black family, Restituere Mechanica. One by one, the cameras shimmered as the dust was sucked away, gears aligned, and enchantments reawakened. The lenses sparked with life. A soft click sounded from the one marked SB, and a small magical roll emerged with an old photograph, a young Sirius Black grinning at the camera, shirtless, holding a bottle of fire whiskey, and clearly up to mischief. Harry let out a low laugh. Typical. He flipped the camera over and whispered, "Chronos invertiz." The camera shimmered again and then projected a flickering image of Sirius spinning in a chair, sticking his tongue out at the lens. A magical recording, blurry and faded, but intact. Harry's voice turned soft. "Maybe one day, I'll show little Sirius the man he's named after." He carried the restored cameras up to the surface, wrapping them gently in dragon hide and placing them on a table in the solar chamber. That evening, as Lyanna fed their son beside the fire, Harry showed her the photograph of young Sirius. Lyanna smiled warmly. "He's exactly as I imagined him. Chaotic, loud, and loyal," Harry said with pride. "And now, his name will live again." "Do you think we could take a photo of our Sirius?" she asked. Harry looked at the camera and smiled. "Tomorrow, we'll take one beneath the weirwood. The first picture of a Gryffindor born in this world." The snow fell softly over Narnia, a gentle, whispering blanket that hushed the village beneath a layer of white serenity. Inside Potter Castle, however, the halls were alive with warmth, laughter, and an air of celebration, not from music or feasting, but from something more enduring. Harry Gryffindor stood in the main corridor, adjusting the placement of a newly printed photograph on the stone wall. It was nearly 6 feet tall, stretched over a polished wooden frame. The image captured a moment from just 2 days ago: Lyanna sitting on the wide fur-lined sofa, holding baby Sirius close to her chest, her eyes bright and her smile unguarded. The infant clutched her finger with both hands, his wild black hair sticking up in every direction. Harry stepped back and admired it. "I'll never tire of that one," he said aloud, mostly to himself. "That smile, it makes this place feel like home." Over the next few days, Harry had become something of a portrait master. He would carry the enchanted camera with him wherever he went, calling over villagers, workers, friends, and students, asking them to pose, some stiff and awkward, others joyful and radiant. The result was a gallery unlike anything the North had ever seen. There was a portrait of the entire kitchen crew, framed beside the castle's entrance to the dining hall. Old Marla, the round-faced cook from Essos, stood at the center with her rolling pin raised in triumph, flanked by wildling boys now apprenticing under her. One of them, Eik, had flour smudged across his cheek in a sheepish grin. Near the nursery door, Harry had hung a series of smaller photographs, one of baby Sirius yawning, another of him wrapped in a snow fox fur blanket, and one where Winter, the mighty white dragon, curled his massive head protectively near the child, his emerald eyes half closed. Lyanna had cried when she saw that one. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the frame. "I never thought I'd have this. A home, a family, memories." Harry placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You deserve it all." Another set of portraits captured the village of Narnia from above, taken from the back of Winter as he soared overhead. The snow-covered rooftops, curling chimney smoke, and narrow paths through the woods were captured in dazzling clarity. One photo showed the schoolhouse, with children pouring out during a break, their fur coats bouncing as they ran, wildling and SSC alike, laughing together. In the school's main hall, Harry placed a photo of Lyanna teaching, a charcoal stick in her hand as she pointed to the board. Her expression was firm yet kind, and several young faces in the crowd were bright with understanding. "She'll be proud of this," Harry said to himself as he cast a preservist charm over the frame. "And when Sirius grows up, he'll see what she built." One morning, Harry gathered everyone working in Potter Castle, from the cleaning staff to the gardeners, from the smiths to the child minders, and asked them to assemble in the great hall. "What's this about, Lord Gryffindor?" asked Joran, a carpenter from the Wildling clans, nervously adjusting his leather apron. "No work today?" said Yenna, an SSC girl who managed the guest rooms, clearly puzzled. Harry smiled. "Today, we make history. I want a portrait of all of you, the people who built this home, who cared for Lyanna, who looked after little Sirius. You are family now." There was laughter, a few awkward coughs, and plenty of straightening of tunics and brushing off of snow. Winter, curious and amused, peeked one golden eye through a massive open window, creating a gust of cold air that made everyone shriek and laugh. Harry positioned the camera, backed away, and tapped the shutter charm. Click. The photograph developed in minutes, one of the largest yet. Dozens of people stood on the great staircase, with Lyanna at the top holding baby Sirius, Harry beside her, arms proudly crossed. Everyone beamed. "It's perfect," Harry said. "We'll place this right here." And so they did. The entire great hall now held a monumental portrait, a testament to the family they had formed. In the evenings, visitors to the castle would wander the halls in awe, pointing at the photos and whispering about how strange and wonderful it was to see people frozen in time, forever smiling. Magic, they'd say, but Harry knew better. It wasn't the magic in the camera that mattered. It was the lives behind the lens, the laughter, the unity, the peace they had forged from nothing. And as he sat by the fire that night, Lyanna dozing beside him, baby Sirius cradled between them, Harry looked at the last photograph he had taken, a simple one of the three of them, just a few hours ago. "I think," he whispered, "this is the first time I feel like I have real family." Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description.
Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Also, you can request any novel so I can turn into audiobooks. Check out our Patreon for more details.